What's up, guys? Welcome to God of Fiction. We've got something special today. What if Harry audited the Potter vaults at age 6 and retaliated by freezing Dumbledore's bank accounts? Don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's dive in. Chapter 1. The letter Gringotts never forgot. The cupboard under the stairs at number 4, Privet Drive, was exactly 3 feet wide and 6 feet long. Harry knew this because he'd measured it once using his own body, lying flat with his arms stretched above his head, and then counting heel to toe along the width until his nose touched the wall. He'd been 5 then. Now he was 6, and he'd grown enough that his feet touched the door when he slept straight, so he curled on his side instead, knees tucked up, listening to the Dursleys move around above him like weather. Uncle Vernon's footsteps were thunderous. Aunt Petunia's were quick and precise, like a bird pecking. Dudley's were both, loud and directionless, crashing from room to room with no apparent purpose. Harry had learned to read the house by its sounds the way sailors read the sea. Vernon's heavy tread heading toward the kitchen at 7 in the morning meant breakfast was expected immediately. Petunia's heels clicking fast toward the cupboard door meant Harry had done something wrong, or was about to be blamed for something he hadn't done, which was functionally the same thing. This particular Tuesday morning in July, the sounds were off. Vernon was in the living room, not the kitchen. Petunia's footsteps had stopped entirely in the hallway, which was strange. And then there was a sound Harry had never heard before, a soft, almost papery flutter, like a bird had gotten trapped inside the mail slot. He pressed his ear against the cupboard door. What in the— Petunia's voice, sharp and cut off too quickly. A pause. Then nothing. Harry waited. 3 minutes passed, he counted them in heartbeats, which he'd gotten quite good at. The sounds didn't resume. No footsteps, no kettle, no Dudley thundering down the stairs demanding his breakfast. Just silence, thick and strange, sitting on the house like a held breath. He tried the cupboard door. It was unlocked. They only locked it when he was being punished, and he hadn't done anything lately, at least nothing they'd noticed. He eased it open an inch, then another, and peered out into the narrow hallway. Petunia was standing at the mail slot with her back to him, one hand pressed flat against the wall like she needed it for support. She was holding something, a creamy envelope, thick and official-looking, the kind that made Harry think of the letters Dudley got from his school. But this one was different. Even from here, Harry could see the wax seal on the back, not red like the fancy ones he'd seen in rubbish bins, but a deep, burnished gold. She hadn't heard him come out. Harry watched her take the envelope to the kitchen. He heard the kettle go on, not for tea, but the old trick she used to open envelopes without tearing them, steaming the flap loose. Then the crinkle of paper. Then silence again, but a different kind. The kind with a person in it who'd stopped breathing properly. Petunia. Vernon's voice from the sitting room. Who was it? Nothing, she said, too fast. Wrong address. More silence. Then the sound of paper being folded, and a drawer opening, and closing. Harry retreated to his cupboard. He pulled the door mostly shut and sat in the dark with his knees against his chest, thinking. Wrong address meant it had a name on it. If it had a name on it, it might be his. He was the only one who got wrong addresses, because his relatives still hadn't fully explained why official-looking letters sometimes turned up with his name in green ink, only to disappear before he could read them. He'd asked once. Vernon had gone the color of a beetroot and told him to stop being difficult. Petunia had found something urgent to do in another room. Harry waited until after dinner, when Vernon was settled in front of the television with a beer and Dudley was upstairs playing video games with enough volume to shake the walls. Petunia was washing up in the kitchen, moving with that careful, controlled efficiency she used when she was upset about something and didn't want to show it. Harry cleared the table without being asked, stacking plates quietly, wiping crumbs into his palm. Aunt Petunia, he said. Was there a letter for me this morning? The glass she was washing didn't break, but it came close, her hands tightened around it so fast he could see her knuckles whiten before she caught herself. She didn't turn around. Don't be silly, she said. Why would anyone write to you? It wasn't a denial. It was a deflection, and Harry was 6 years old, but he wasn't stupid. He'd lived his entire life learning to read what people didn't say, and what Petunia wasn't saying was screaming. I'm going to bed, he said. She made a sound that might have been acknowledgement. He went to his cupboard, closed the door, and lay in the dark for 2 hours until the house settled into sleep around him. Uncle Vernon's snores were like a foghorn, reliable and loud enough to cover almost anything. Dudley had the deep, instant sleep of someone with a full stomach and no worries. Petunia slept lighter, but Harry had gotten good at this. He eased out of the cupboard in socked feet, moving on the parts of the hallway floor he'd memorized wouldn't creak. The kitchen drawer where Petunia kept rubber bands, takeaway menus, and anything she didn't want to deal with immediately was the third one down on the left. Harry opened it 1 inch, 2 inches, sliding his hand in carefully until his fingers found the thick texture of that creamy envelope. He took it back to his cupboard, pulled the door shut, and switched on the little torch he'd found in the rubbish at school 3 weeks ago and had been keeping for exactly this kind of necessity. He turned the envelope over. The wax seal was gold, pressed with an image he didn't recognize at first, a dragon, coiled around what looked like a building, with words beneath it he had to sound out carefully, Gringotts Wizarding Bank. Your wealth. Your trust. Our oath. He turned it over. On the front, in ink that shifted between black and deep bronze depending on the angle of his torchlight, were the words, Harry James Potter, the cupboard under the stairs 4, Privet Drive, Little Whinging, Surrey Inheritance Audit Notification, 3rd attempt. Non-collection triggers dormancy protocols. Harry stared at this for a long time. 3rd attempt meant there had been 2 others. 2 other letters that had come and been intercepted and had never reached him. He felt something move in his chest, not quite anger yet, more like the thing that came before anger, the quiet hot tightening that happened when he understood something unfair was being done to him and there was nothing he could do about it. Except this time, maybe there was. He opened the envelope carefully, trying not to tear it. The letter inside was written in the same shifting ink, on paper that felt heavier than any paper he'd handled before, almost like cloth. He read slowly, sounding out the longer words in a whisper barely above breath, to Harry James Potter, heir and primary beneficiary of the most ancient and noble house of Potter. This communication represents the 3rd and final notification from Gringotts Wizarding Bank, London, regarding your right to a formal audit of all vaults and holdings registered under House Potter, including Primary Vault 687, Secondary Vault 2, and all associated subaccounts and trust portfolios. As the sole surviving member of the Potter line and the rightful heir by blood and by law, you are entitled to a full accounting of all deposits, withdrawals, transfers, and third-party authorizations made on your behalf since the date of your inheritance. Please be advised that under Goblin Banking Law, Statute 14, Article 7, any beneficiary who presents this letter in person at the main branch of Gringotts, London, is entitled to immediate audit consideration regardless of age, guardian consent, or ministry authorization. This is your right. It cannot be revoked. If this notification is not acted upon within 14 days of this delivery, all audit rights for the current fiscal year will enter dormancy. We await your attendance. Iron Hook, Senior Accounts Manager, Gringotts Wizarding Bank. Harry read it twice. Then he folded it carefully along its original creases and tucked it back in the envelope. He lay in the dark with the letter on his chest, his heart beating steadily against it, and thought. He had rights. There was a whole bank full of things that were his, and apparently people had been doing things with those things without asking him. And there were words in that letter, 3rd attempt, you're right, it cannot be revoked, that sat in his chest like small, hot coals. Your wealth. Your trust. Our oath. He made a decision the way he made most decisions, quickly, quietly, and without asking anyone's permission because he'd learned early that asking was mostly pointless. He was going to London. The logistics took 2 days, which Harry considered reasonable given that he was 6 and had approximately £4.37 in coins he'd gathered over 18 months from down the back of the sofa, between seat cushions, and from the pavement on the way to and from school. He knew London was reachable by train from Little Whinging Station, because he'd heard Uncle Vernon complain about the commuter line often enough to have internalized the schedule. He also knew that children under a certain age could sometimes ride for free if they looked confident and stayed near adults who appeared to be their parents. Harry was very good at looking like he belonged somewhere he wasn't supposed to be. It was a survival skill he'd developed entirely by accident. On Thursday morning, he woke at 5, dressed in the least terrible of Dudley's hand-me-downs, which was still enormous on him but at least had no obvious stains, tucked the Gringotts letter into the inner pocket of an overlarge jacket, and slipped out through the kitchen door while the house was still breathing the deep, unconscious breath of sleep. He'd left nothing behind that would indicate planning. He'd taken nothing that wasn't already his. He'd pulled the door shut behind him with the careful precision of someone who'd been invisible his whole life and was extremely good at it. The walk to the station was 40 minutes. Harry did it at a steady pace, hands in the huge jacket pockets, watching the sky go from dark blue to a pale, watery gray. He bought nothing at the station, couldn't afford to waste money, and positioned himself near a family with 3 children and a large amount of luggage when the train arrived. The conductor glanced at the family, made a tired gesture, and moved on. Harry found a seat by the window and watched Surrey slide away behind him with a feeling he didn't have a name for yet. It was something like relief, except relief usually meant the bad thing was over, and he wasn't sure what category this fell into. The train took 50 minutes. London arrived around him in stages, first the density of it, buildings crowding close to the tracks, graffiti and brick and the complicated smell of a city that had too many people and too much happening to be tidy about it. Then the station itself, vast and echoing, full of the kind of purposeful noise that was different from the noise at the Dursleys in that it had nothing to do with him at all. He stood on the concourse for a moment, looking up at the departure boards, getting his bearings. He'd memorized the address from another document he'd found in Petunia's drawer while he was looking for the letter, a single sheet printed on plain paper, not magical, just someone's typed-out notes, Gringotts Bank, Diagon Alley, accessible via the Leaky Cauldron Public House, Charing Cross Road, London. He found Charing Cross Road by asking a street vendor who seemed amused by the question but pointed him in the right direction. The street was bookshops and cafes, already half awake in the early morning, gates being rolled up and coffee being brewed. Harry walked along it checking the numbers and names of buildings until he stopped in front of what appeared to be a very old, very shabby pub wedged between a large bookshop and a record store, with a sign so faded above the door that the words were barely legible. The Leaky Cauldron. He pushed the door open. The inside smelled like wood smoke and something herbal and old, lit by lamps that cast everything in amber. The handful of people inside at this hour, an old man nursing a drink in the corner, a woman in robes reading a newspaper that Harry stared at because the pictures were moving, turned to look at him with varying degrees of curiosity. The barman, a bald man with a friendly face, set down the glass he was polishing and tilted his head. "Bit young to be in here alone, aren't we?" he said, not unkindly. "I need to get to Diagon Alley," Harry said. "Gringotts." The barman's eyebrows went up. He studied Harry for a moment, the too big clothes, the mess of dark hair, the green eyes that looked back at him with a directness that was startling in someone that small. Then his gaze caught on the scar on Harry's forehead, half hidden by a flop of fringe, and something changed in his face. It went soft and complicated all at once, the way faces did when they recognized someone. "Merlin's, he stopped himself. Cleared his throat. "Right then. Through the back. I'll show you the brick." "I can manage," Harry said. The barman hesitated. "It's just, you need a wand to tap the—" "Do I need a wand," Harry said, "or do I need magic?" Another pause. The old man in the corner had set down his drink and was watching with naked interest. "Magic," the barman admitted slowly. "Then I can manage," Harry said again, and walked through to the back courtyard. The wall was there, just as the note had described, old brick, covered in moss, nothing special about it to look at. Harry stood in front of it and held up his hand, not sure exactly what he was doing but somehow certain he was doing something, and pushed. Not physically. The way he pushed sometimes when he needed things to happen, the wordless internal shove that had gotten him onto the school roof once when Dudley's gang was chasing him, that had changed his teacher's hair blue by accident when he was 4, that existed in him like a second pulse. The bricks moved. They didn't just move, they folded and rearranged themselves in a rolling cascade, a circular motion like a stone dropped in still water, opening outward into a cobbled, winding street that was absolutely, completely, overwhelmingly alive. Harry stepped through into Diagon Alley. Even at this hour, it was extraordinary. Shops with hand-painted signs leaning out over the narrow street, windows full of things that moved and glittered and pulsed with light. A cauldron shop with bronze and silver pots stacked outside in wobbling towers. An apothecary whose bottles of ingredients cast colored shadows on the cobblestones. Robes hanging in a window like quiet, patient people. Owls sleeping in cages outside a pet shop, heads tucked under wings. And ahead, at the end of the alley's curve, rising white and imposing as a cliff face, Gringotts Bank. It was enormous in a way that felt deliberate, designed to communicate that everything inside it was serious and permanent and not to be trifled with. The marble columns were each wider than Harry was tall. The bronze doors were at least 30 feet high. The goblins flanking the entrance were small and still and watching everything with the kind of attention that made Harry feel like they'd already catalogued him completely. He walked up the steps. One of the door goblins looked down at him. Its face was angular and sharp-featured, with eyes like polished amber and hands that gripped a short pike with practiced ease. It regarded Harry with the expression of someone who had seen a great many things and was internally placing this new thing on the list. "I have a letter," Harry said. He reached into his jacket and produced the Gringotts envelope, holding it up. An inheritance audit notification. "Third attempt," it says. "I'm here to act on it." The goblin looked at the envelope. Looked at Harry. Something moved in its amber eyes, not quite surprise, but something adjacent to it. It glanced at the other door goblin, who was observing with equal stillness. "Your name," it said. "Harry James Potter." Both goblins were very still for a moment. Then the first one stepped aside and gestured toward the bronze doors. "Inside. You will speak with an accounts manager." "Thank you," Harry said. He went inside. The interior of Gringotts was a cathedral of commerce, high vaulted ceilings that disappeared into shadow, an enormous chandelier that seemed to be made of crystallized light, and a vast hall lined on both sides with counter stations where goblins in green uniforms were conducting business with a focused efficiency that made the whole room hum. The marble floors reflected everything. The noise of quills and scales and the chink of coins and the murmur of transactions created a sound like a river over stones. Every goblin in the room looked up when Harry walked in. Not dramatically. Not all at once. But he felt it, a ripple of attention moving through the hall like a current, heads turning by fractions, eyes tracking him. He was aware that he looked like exactly what he was, a very small boy in enormously large clothes who had somehow gotten here alone. He was also aware that none of that mattered, because he had the letter. He walked to the nearest available counter and looked up at the goblin behind it. The goblin looked down at him. "I need to request an inheritance audit," Harry said. He placed the letter on the counter. "Harry Potter. Vault 687 and associated accounts. I have the notification letter." The goblin picked up the letter with 2 fingers, turned it over, examined the seal, then opened it and read it in the time it might take a faster person to blink. When it looked up, its expression was entirely neutral in the way that wasn't actually neutral at all. "One moment," it said. It did not disappear to fetch someone. It did something Harry didn't quite catch, a tap of a finger somewhere below the counter's edge, a signal of some kind, and then stood quite still. 30 seconds later, a door set into the wall behind the counters opened and a goblin emerged that was clearly different from the others. Not taller, goblins didn't seem to vary much in height, but there was something about the way this one moved, a kind of compact authority, that made the counters it passed seem to straighten slightly. It stopped in front of Harry's counter. Its eyes were very dark and very sharp, and they moved over Harry with the same cataloging assessment as the door guards, except more thorough. It was dressed in deeper clothes than the counter-goblins, a dark jacket with a pin at the collar that caught the chandelier light. "I am Iron Hook," it said. "I authored that letter." "Then you're who I want to talk to," Harry said. Iron Hook looked at him for a long moment. "You came alone?" "Yes." "You are 6 years old." "That's what the letter says too," Harry said. "It also says my age isn't a factor. That this is my right and it can't be revoked. I'd like to exercise it, please." Something moved across Iron Hook's face. It was quick and complicated and Harry couldn't fully read it, but it wasn't dismissive. If anything, it looked like the expression of someone recalibrating. "Follow me," Iron Hook said. The office Iron Hook led him to was down a corridor off the main hall, past doors that Harry's instincts told him not to touch and lamps that burned with a light that felt aware. The office itself was small and dense, shelves of ledgers floor to ceiling, a desk that seemed to be made of something darker than ordinary wood, a single chair across from it that was built for goblin proportions. Harry sat in it anyway, feet dangling, letter in his lap. Iron Hook settled behind the desk and placed both hands flat on its surface, looking at Harry with that same unreadable intensity. "I will be direct," Iron Hook said. "Good," Harry said. "This is the third attempt to deliver that notification. The previous 2 were intercepted before they reached you. We are aware of this." Harry felt something go very still inside him. "Intercepted by who?" "We have suspicions. We do not yet have confirmation. That is, in part, what an audit will determine." Iron Hook's fingers moved across the desk's surface, not quite a tap. "I should tell you, Mr. Potter, that when your account manager first flagged the irregularities in your vaults, 4 years ago, and submitted the audit notification, he expected a response within weeks. When none came, he resubmitted. When the second attempt also produced no result, he brought the matter to me." Harry sat with this. "4 years ago," he said. "I was 2. "Correct. The irregularities began immediately after your parents' deaths, in November 1981. Iron Hook's voice was precise and even, like a blade that knew exactly how sharp it was. "Gringotts does not lose track of accounts. We notice when things move that should not move, and when things disappear that were not withdrawn." "How much is missing?" Harry asked. "We have not yet conducted the formal audit. I cannot give you confirmed figures until we do." Iron Hook paused. "What I can tell you is that the preliminary review my department conducted shows significant, I would say extraordinary, discrepancies between the recorded holdings of House Potter as of October 1981 and the current state of those accounts." The coals in Harry's chest were burning steadily now. He kept his face even. "Then let's do the formal audit. It will take time. We will need your blood authorization to open certain sealed records." "How much blood?" Harry asked, because he was practical. "A drop," Iron Hook said. "Applied to a verification stone." "Fine." Iron Hook opened a drawer and produced a small gray stone, smooth as river rock but faintly luminescent, and slid it across the desk with a silver instrument that looked like an extremely small version of a letter opener. Harry took the instrument, pressed the tip against his fingertip, it barely stung, and pressed the welling bead of blood to the stone's surface. The stone glowed. Not faintly, blazed, a warm gold-white light that swept the room and caused Iron Hook to go very still with an expression that Harry couldn't quite name yet but would later recognize as the goblin equivalent of awe. "Well," Iron Hook said, after a moment. "That confirms lineage beyond any doubt." He reached forward and took the stone back. Its glow faded to a steady pulse, like something breathing. "I am going to need to bring this to the director." "The director of the bank?" Harry asked. "Yes." Iron Hook stood. "His name is Ragnarok. He should know that you are here." He paused at the door, turned back. "Mr. Potter. I want you to understand something. What we are about to uncover, I believe it will be significant. Are you prepared for that? Harry thought about the cupboard. About the 3 measurements he'd taken of its floor space. About every letter that had been steamed open and hidden in a kitchen drawer. About third attempt printed in shifting ink on cream paper. I've been prepared my whole life, he said. I just didn't know what for. Ironhook regarded him with those dark, sharp eyes. Then it did something Harry had not expected from a goblin. It nodded, slowly, with a gravity that felt like a salute. Wait here, it said. I will not be long. Harry sat in the chair with his feet dangling and his letter in his lap and the faint luminescent pulse of the verification stone still visible on the desk, and he waited. Outside the office, the sounds of Gringotts continued, the river stone hum of commerce, the chink of coins, the scratch of quills. Ordinary and relentless and utterly indifferent. Harry was not indifferent. He was the opposite of indifferent. He was paying the closest attention he had ever paid to anything, storing everything up, because he understood without being able to fully articulate it that something was beginning. Something that had been stopped and delayed and redirected for years was finally, irrevocably in motion. A door opened. Footsteps, heavier than iron hooks, more deliberate. And then a goblin entered the office who was older than any Harry had seen yet, with a face that was a map of experience and intelligence and something that functioned like absolute, carved-in certainty. He wore a jacket so dark it ate the light, and a pin at his throat that caught the lamp glow like a small, controlled fire. He looked at Harry. Harry looked back. I am Ragnarok, the goblin said. Director of Gringotts, London. Harry Potter, Harry said. Ragnarok sat in Ironhook's chair, folded his hands on the desk, and examined Harry with an attention so complete and unself-conscious that most adults would have found it uncomfortable. Harry found it refreshing. It was honest. It was the way he looked at things himself. Ironhook tells me you came alone, Ragnarok said. Yes. From Surrey. Yes. Without telling your guardians. They had the letter for 2 days, Harry said. They weren't going to tell me about it. Ragnarok was quiet for a moment. You read the letter. You understood what it meant. Most of it. Harry hesitated, then decided honesty was the correct approach with someone who looked like they could tell the difference. I didn't know all the words. But I understood the important ones. Rights. Audit. Third attempt. Non-collection triggers dormancy. He paused. I didn't want my rights to go dormant. Something happened in Ragnarok's face that Harry would later learn was extremely rare, a crack in the professional composure, a flash of something genuine and startled. It was gone in an instant, replaced by that carved certainty, but it had been there. No, Ragnarok said quietly. We did not want that either. He unfolded his hands and placed them flat on the desk, a gesture Harry was beginning to recognize as significant. Mr. Potter. I am going to be very direct with you. Ironhook said that too, Harry said. I appreciate it. Our preliminary review indicates that your family's vaults have been accessed on numerous occasions without your knowledge or authorization, by parties who had no legal right to do so under goblin banking law. The amounts involved are, Ragnarok stopped. Continued. Considerable. And the scope of the access suggests it was deliberate, systematic, and ongoing. Harry's hands were very still in his lap. Someone has been stealing from me. Under goblin law, yes. Under Ministry of Magic law, Ragnarok's expression was brief and precise, the way you'd express an opinion about something that smelled bad. The ministry has historically been flexible in how it defines authorized access when it concerns certain influential parties. But you're not the ministry, Harry said. No, Ragnarok agreed. We are not. He looked at Harry steadily. We are Gringotts. And Gringotts law has not been flexible. What has been done to your accounts is a violation of our charter, our oath, and frankly our dignity as bankers. He paused. We sent you 3 letters, Mr. Potter. That is, by our standards, an extraordinary effort. We do not chase clients. But in this case, we felt the obligation. Harry thought about this. Because you knew something was wrong. Because we knew something was wrong, Ragnar confirmed, and we knew that the person it was wrong for was not the one who could fix it without knowing. I'm 6, Harry said. Yes. And I'm still the one who had to come here myself. No adult helped me. Yes, Ragnar said, and the word was quiet and weighted with something that wasn't quite pity, it was too steady for pity, but acknowledged everything it needed to. Harry nodded slowly. Somewhere in his chest, the hot coals had settled into something cooler and more purposeful, the way a fire settled from wild flame into steady heat that could burn for a long time. He looked at Ragnar and Ragnar looked at him, and something was established between them that wasn't friendship yet but was the foundation of something that could become it. I want to know everything, Harry said. Every withdrawal. Every transfer. Every person who touched my family's money. I want names and amounts and dates. The full audit will take several hours, Ragnar said. I'm not going anywhere, Harry said. Ragnar looked at him for another moment. Then he stood and moved to the door, opened it, and spoke to someone in the corridor in a language Harry didn't understand but that sounded like gravel and iron and absolute authority. He turned back. I have ordered the preliminary account files brought here. I have also ordered food, as it is still early and you have not eaten. He said this without preamble or softness, just as a fact being addressed. We will begin the audit when the files arrive. It will take the time it takes. Harry felt his stomach growl, which was embarrassing. He hadn't eaten since last night's dinner, which had been minimal. He hadn't had time to think about food in all the planning and traveling and doing. Thank you, he said. Don't thank me, Ragnar said. This is our duty. What was done to your accounts was done in violation of our oath. He settled back into the chair. What we are going to do today, we are doing because it is right. And because whoever thought they could steal from a child and hide it behind enough politics and influence to make Gringotts look the other way was wrong. The finality in his voice was absolute. Nobody makes Gringotts look the other way. Harry thought about that. Then he said, I think I'm going to like it here. And for the second time that morning, Ragnar did the thing that was extremely rare. He almost smiled. Outside, London was fully awake now, the city pressing on toward its ordinary day. Inside Gringotts, in a small office off the main corridor, a 6-year-old boy and the director of the most powerful bank in the wizarding world sat across a desk from each other and waited for the files that were going to change everything. The audit was about to begin. And somewhere in London, in a tall, thin house that hummed with carefully arranged secrets, an old man with half-moon spectacles was reading a different letter, the kind that arrived when something he'd been managing very carefully for 5 years had just, quietly and irreversibly, begun to slip. He set the letter down on his desk. Folded his hands. Thought. For the first time in a very long time, Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore was not entirely sure what to do next. Chapter 2, What the Ledgers Say. The files arrived on a cart. That was the first thing that told Harry the scale of what he was dealing with. Not a folder, not a stack of papers, a cart, the kind with wheels that squeaked slightly under weight, pushed by 2 goblins who moved with the careful deliberateness of people handling something significant. The ledgers stacked on it were enormous, bound in leather that had gone dark with age, with metal clasps and spines stamped in gold that had mostly worn to dull suggestions of letters. There were 11 of them. Behind the ledgers, in neat rows, were smaller files tied with cord, and behind those, 3 flat boxes that Ragnar looked at for a moment before setting aside. The boxes later, he said to the 2 goblins. They nodded and left without a word. A 3rd goblin entered behind them, young, Harry thought, though he was still learning to read goblin ages, carrying a tray with bread, butter, a hard-boiled egg, and a small pot of something that smelled like tea but wasn't quite. It was set on the corner of the desk without comment. Ragnar didn't acknowledge it. Harry pulled the tray toward him and ate with the quiet efficiency of someone who'd spent years never knowing when the next meal was coming, and didn't waste time feeling self-conscious about it. Ironhook came in last, carrying a smaller ledger that he kept close, and took a position to Ragnar's left. He opened the ledger and produced a quill that seemed to anticipate his intentions, hovering ready. "We will go in order," Ragnar said. He opened the first of the large ledgers. Vault 687. The primary vault. "We will start from November 1st, 1981, the week following your parents' deaths, and move forward." Harry set down his bread. "All right." Ragnar began. The first entry was dated November 3rd, 1981. A withdrawal of 5,000 galleons, authorized by a signatory code that Ironhook cross-referenced in his smaller ledger and then looked up with an expression that was careful and deliberate. "Signatory code A7, Ironhook said. "That is a Ministry of Magic administrative code. Specifically, the Office of the Chief Warlock of the Wizengamot." Harry knew that title. He'd read it in the letter, in the stack of documents he'd found in Petunia's drawer over the course of 3 separate late-night investigations. He hadn't connected it yet to a name. "Who is the Chief Warlock?" Harry asked. Ragnar and Ironhook exchanged a look that contained an entire conversation. "Currently, and as of 1981, Ragnar said, that position is held by Albus Dumbledore." Harry held that name for a moment. He'd heard it before, whispered at the leaky cauldron when he'd walked through, the barman's face going complicated. He'd seen it on the backs of chocolate frog cards in a bin outside a sweet shop on the way to the alley. Albus Dumbledore. Considered by many the greatest wizard of the age. "Go on," he said. Ragnar went on. The second entry was November 7th. Another withdrawal, 8,000 galleons. Same signatory code. The third was November 15th, 12,000, a different code this time, one that Ironhook identified after a longer cross-reference as belonging to the office of the Hogwarts headmaster. "Same person," Harry said. "Yes," Ironhook confirmed. "He used 2 different codes to take money from the same vault." "Yes." Harry absorbed this without visible reaction. Inside, the steady fire was burning very cleanly now, the way fires burned when they had good fuel and enough air. He reached for his tea that wasn't quite tea and drank some. It tasted like something that had been steeped in autumn and mineral water, and it helped. They continued. The pattern that emerged over the next 2 hours was not chaotic. It was not impulsive or panicked or even particularly hidden, it was routine. Methodical withdrawals at regular intervals, sometimes weekly, sometimes monthly, always through the same 2 signatory codes or minor variations of them. The amounts varied, some small, 50 galleons, the kind of sum that might go unnoticed in a large account, some staggering. A withdrawal of 40,000 galleons in March 1983. Another of 62,000 in September of the same year, transferred not to a personal account but to something listed only as Phoenix Fund. "What's the Phoenix Fund?" Harry asked. Ironhook's quill paused. "An account registered at Gringotts under a charitable trust designation. The registered trustee is Albus Dumbledore." "A charity," Harry said. "Registered as one," Ragnar said, and his tone communicated very precisely that registration and reality were not necessarily the same thing. They moved on. By the time they reached 1984, the number Ironhook was running in the margin of his ledger had crossed 6 figures. Harry watched the quill add digits and thought about the cupboard under the stairs, about the second-hand shoes he wore to school that were Dudley's cast-offs and were 2 sizes too large, about the birthday cake he had never once been given because his birthday fell in July and in July the Dursleys forgot he existed unless he was doing chores. The Dursleys. "You mentioned the Dursleys might be in the records," Harry said. "When do we get to that?" Ragnar turned 3 pages. "Here." The entry was dated December 1981, 6 weeks after the first Dumbledore withdrawal. It was different from the others. Not a vault withdrawal but an external transfer, a structured recurring payment from a subaccount associated with Vault 687, designated Guardian Provision Fund. The amount was 500 galleons per month. The recipient was listed as V. Dursley, 4, Privet Drive, Little Whinging, Surrey. Harry stared at it. 500 galleons a month, he said. Every month. Since I was 1. Yes, Ironhook said. Harry did the mathematics in his head, slowly, because he was 6 and the numbers were big, but he got there. That's thousands. That's years of money. Approximately 35,000 galleons over the period shown, Ironhook said, which confirmed Harry's arithmetic was on the right track even if he'd undershot. Harry thought about the cupboard. About the cast-off shoes. About the times he'd gone to bed with his stomach hollow because dinner had been allocated entirely to Dudley's bottomless appetite. 35,000 galleons of Guardian provision, funneled to the Dursleys, and not 1 pound of it had ever come anywhere near Harry. Where did they think it was coming from? Harry asked. They were told it was a ministry welfare provision, Ragnarok said. Standard language in the accompanying paperwork, which we also have. He pulled one of the flat boxes forward and opened it. Inside were sheets of official-looking correspondence, printed with ministry letterheads. These were sent to the Dursley household when the payments began. They were told the money was a state provision for the care of a, he read from the paper, displaced magical ward. They knew it was for my care, Harry said. The language makes that clear. And they took it. Harry set down the cup. Every month for nearly 5 years, and they put me in a cupboard. Nobody in the room said anything for a moment. Ironhook's quill was still. Ragnarok's hands were flat on the desk. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, it was the kind that understood itself. Yes, Ragnarok said simply. Harry looked at the entry for a long time. Then he turned the page himself, reaching across the desk with a hand that was completely steady. Keep going, he said. I want all of it. They kept going. The second half of the morning brought the secondary vault, Vault 2, which Harry had barely registered in the letter but which turned out to be older than the primary vault by several generations and to contain holdings that were not money. Property deeds. Legal documents. Artifacts registered under the Family Heirlooms Preservation Act. A seat on the Wisingamot, hereditary and currently listed as vacant despite Harry's obvious existence as the heir. A seat on the Wisingamot, Harry said. What's that? The governing body of the wizarding world, Ragnarok said. Law, justice, governance. Your family has held a hereditary seat for 11 generations. It has been marked vacant since your parents' deaths. He paused. It should not have been. You are the heir. Even as a minor, the seat should be held in trust and your proxy should have been appointed. Who would appoint my proxy? Your designated magical guardian, Ragnarok said. Which, under your parents' will, was, let me guess, Harry said. Ragnarok looked at him steadily. Sirius Black was named your primary guardian in the will. He was arrested the day after your parents' deaths and has been imprisoned in Azkaban since. What about a secondary guardian? Ironhook turned pages. The will names a secondary guardian, Alice Longbottom. She has been incapacitated since 1981. A tertiary guardian is also listed, he stopped. Who? Harry asked. Albus Dumbledore, Ironhook said. Listed as tertiary guardian. The room was very quiet. So he placed me with the Dursleys, Harry said slowly, working through it. Even though my parents will named 2 other guardians first. Both of whom were conveniently unavailable, Ragnarok said, and the word conveniently landed in the room with the weight of something much larger than itself. Harry sat back in the chair. His feet didn't reach the floor, which was mildly ridiculous given the magnitude of what was being discussed, and some distant part of him noticed the absurdity and filed it away. He looked at the pile of ledgers, at Ironhook's margin calculations that had now crossed into a second page, at Ragnarok's face which was carved and steady and furious in the deep, controlled way of someone who did not waste fury on noise. How much total? Harry asked. Everything. All the accounts. What's the number? Ironhook looked at his margin page. His quill moved, adding, cross-referencing, moving back and adding again. The room waited. Outside, muffled by the office walls, the sound of Gringotts went about its business. Confirmed unauthorized withdrawals from the primary vault, Ironhook said, total approximately 840,000 galleons, not including the Phoenix Fund transfers, which add a further 120,000. He paused. The Guardian provision payments to the Dursleys total 35,000. Property held in secondary vault that should have generated income under standard heritage management but has sat unmanaged and therefore effectively lost value. This is harder to quantify precisely, but the conservative estimate for lost returns is in the region of 200,000 galleons. He looked up. Total confirmed loss, conservatively, approximately 1.1 million galleons. The number sat in the room like a stone dropped into deep water. Harry had no context for 1.1 million galleons. He knew the coins he'd gathered were £4.37. He knew the Dursleys drove a new car every 3 years and considered this a sign of their prosperity. Those things lived on one end of a scale, and 1.1 million galleons lived somewhere on the other end so far away he could barely see it. But he understood the concept. He understood stolen, and he understood mine, and the number gave him something concrete to be angry about in a way that transcended the size of it. I want it back, Harry said. Yes, Ragnarok said. We imagined you might. What can you actually do? Harry asked. What does goblin banking law allow? Ragnarok leaned forward slightly. Under goblin banking law, when an audit reveals unauthorized access to an account, Gringotts is authorized, in fact obligated, to take immediate protective action. This includes freezing the accounts of any party found to have made unauthorized withdrawals, pending restitution. He held Harry's gaze. We can freeze Dumbledore's accounts at Gringotts. The Phoenix Fund. Any connected accounts. Do it, Harry said. There is a process, Ragnarok said. We issue a formal audit finding. We send notice of the freeze to the account holder. We file a record with the Wizengamot. How long does that take? The finding can be issued today, Ragnarok said. The freeze takes effect the moment it is issued. Harry looked at him. Then let's not waste time. Ragnarok looked back for a moment with that carved expression that Harry was learning to read. There was something behind it that wasn't quite satisfaction but was the direction satisfaction pointed. He turned to Ironhook. Begin drafting the formal audit finding. I want it complete by end of day. He turned back to Harry. There is something else you should know. What? The freeze on Dumbledore's accounts is within our authority. But the recovery of the stolen funds, that will require a legal process. Gringotts will support your claim fully and provide all documentation, but you will need representation in the wizarding world. Someone who can act in your interests. Ragnarok paused. You are 6. And despite everything, you are still technically under the guardianship of Albus Dumbledore until that designation is legally challenged. Harry thought about that. Is there a way to challenge it? Under the Family and Magical Lineage Act of 1843, a magical heir of sufficient demonstrated ability can petition for emancipation of financial affairs, meaning that while you remain a minor, control of your financial and legal affairs passes entirely to you and to Gringotts as your designated banking institution, outside the authority of any guardian. Ironhook spoke without looking up from his writing. It requires a demonstration of magical sufficiency and a formal petition. What's magical sufficiency? Ironhook's quill paused. He and Ragnarok exchanged that look again. The stone, Ragnarok said quietly. Your blood on the verification stone this morning produced a response that I have not seen in 30 years of directorship. The act requires a demonstration that the heir possesses magic of mature enough character to warrant independent governance of their affairs. He looked at Harry carefully. What you did to the verification stone, and what you did to the wall in the leaky cauldron courtyard, more than satisfies that requirement. The barman told you about the wall, Harry said. Tom sent a flume message before you had walked 20 feet into the alley, Ragnarok said, not unkindly. Harry almost laughed. It surprised him, the impulse, sudden and genuine. He let it sit. So I petitioned for financial emancipation. Yes. And then your financial affairs, your accounts, your legal matters connected to the vaults, all of it passes to your authority, with Gringotts as your institutional support. Dumbledore cannot touch your accounts. The Dursley's payments stop. Ragnarok paused. He will still be your residential guardian. We cannot change your living situation through banking law. That requires a different process. One thing at a time, Harry said. Ragnarok studied him. You are quite calm about this. I'm furious, Harry said. I've been furious since I read the letter in my cupboard at 2 in the morning. He met Ragnarok's eyes. But being loud about it doesn't get anything done. I want to get things done. The silence that followed had a different quality than the earlier ones. This one had respect in it. Then let us get things done, Ragnarok said. The petition took another hour to draft. Ironhook wrote it, Harry read every word of it and asked questions about the ones he didn't understand, for times Ironhook answered and twice Ragnarok answered instead, with the specificity of someone who'd written the legal framework himself. Harry signed it with the quill Ironhook offered, pressing his name into the parchment in careful letters. His signature looked young and slightly labored, and he was mildly irritated by that because the words around it were very serious, but there was nothing to be done about the fact that he was 6. The verification stone was placed beneath the signature and pulsed once, steadily, and Ironhook noted this in the margin. Petition submitted and sealed, Ironhook said. Under the Act, it takes effect upon submission. Your financial affairs are now under your authority and Gringotts' protection. Harry took a breath. Something shifted, a loosening, somewhere deep, the sensation of a lock that had been on something for years clicking open from the inside. The Dursley payments, he said. When do they stop? They are already stopped, Ironhook said. As of the petition's submission, the Guardian Provision Fund is frozen pending your instruction. Good. Harry thought. I want the account closed. Whatever's left in it, put it back in Vault 687. Ironhook noted this. Ragnarok watched. Now, Harry said. Dumbledore's accounts. Ragnarok produced a new document, this one pre-drafted, as if he'd anticipated this moment and had prepared accordingly, which Harry suspected he had. It was the formal audit finding. 2 pages, dense with the specific, authoritative language of goblin banking law, containing dates and amounts and signatory codes and the phrase unauthorized access constituting violation of Gringotts Banking Charter, Article 3, Section 9 3 times. At the bottom was a section listing the immediate banking actions Gringotts was taking in response. Harry read it. All of it. The Phoenix Fund is included. Yes. All accounts associated with the A7 signatory code and the Hogwarts Headmaster Code are frozen pending investigation and restitution. Ragnarok looked at Harry steadily. When this notice is delivered to Dumbledore, he will know you have been here. I know, Harry said. He is a powerful man. He has influence with the Ministry and with many parts of the wizarding world. He will not simply accept this. I know that too. Harry looked at the audit finding. Can I keep a copy of this? You get the original, Ragnarok said. We keep a certified copy. Harry took the document, folded it, and put it in his jacket next to the notification letter. 2 pieces of paper that, together, represented the first things that had ever been entirely, incontrovertibly his. One more thing, Harry said. He hesitated, not from uncertainty, but from the careful consideration of someone making sure they had the right words. The will. My parents' will. Can I read it? Ragnarok looked at him for a moment. Then he reached into the flat box and produced a sealed document. It has been filed with us for safekeeping since 1981. The ministry holds a copy, but they have not actioned it. He slid it across the desk. Harry broke the seal. He read slowly, his lips moving slightly on the harder words. James and Lily Potter had written their will with the pragmatic thoroughness of people who understood their world was dangerous. Property to Harry. Financial holdings to Harry. The title of Lord Potter to Harry upon his coming of age or demonstration of magical sufficiency, whichever came first. Magical guardian designations in order: Sirius Black, Alice Longbottom, Albus Dumbledore. And a note, written in a different hand from the formal legal text, in ink that Harry recognized from the signature at the bottom as his mother's. He read it twice. His face didn't change, but something behind it did, and Ragnarok and Ironhook, who had read that note during the preliminary review and had known what was in it, gave him the silence he needed. The note said, "If you're reading this, Harry, then something went wrong. We are so sorry. You were so loved. Whatever anyone tells you about why things are the way they are, remember you always had the right to choose for yourself. We wanted that for you more than anything. Please be brave, and please be kind, and please be magnificently, impossibly difficult for anyone who tries to tell you who you should be." Harry refolded the will carefully. Put it in the jacket with everything else. "My mother was a clever woman," he said. "From what our records indicate," Ragnarok said, "she was extraordinary." Harry nodded. He sat quietly for a moment, and the goblin director and his accounts manager let him, because they were perceptive enough to recognize the difference between a person who needed to be distracted and a person who needed to be given 30 seconds of peace. Then Harry straightened in the chair, small and slightly ridiculous in its adult proportions, feet still not quite reaching the floor, and looked at Ragnarok with green eyes that were completely clear and completely decided. "What happens next?" he asked. "Gringotts delivers the audit finding and freeze notice to Dumbledore today, by secure goblin courier, a method that cannot be intercepted or delayed." Ragnarok paused meaningfully on those words, and Harry understood the pointed reference to his own intercepted letters. He will receive it before end of business. And then? And then he will try to respond. Possibly to us directly, possibly through the ministry, possibly through other channels. Ragnarok folded his hands. But the freeze is in place. The petition is filed. The audit finding is sealed. These are facts. They cannot be unmade. "I need to get back to Privet Drive," Harry said. "Before they notice I'm gone." "We can arrange a port key, I don't know how to use one," Harry said. "Train is fine. I know the way." Ragnarok looked at him for a long moment. "There is something you should take with you," he said, and reached under the desk, not into a drawer but lower, somewhere Harry couldn't see, and produced a small leather card case. Inside was a single card, heavy cream stock, with an embossed crest and the words Gringotts Wizarding Bank, Priority Client Authorization. Below that, stamped in gold, H.J. Potter, Lord of House Potter. This gives you access to our secure FLU network from any Gringotts branch or affiliated location. It identifies you to any goblin institution in Britain. And it means that any further correspondence addressed to you will be delivered directly and personally by goblin courier and will not be interceptable. Ragnarok's voice was even. "Whoever has been diverting your letters will find that considerably more difficult going forward." Harry took the card. It was warm, slightly, in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. "Thank you," he said. "Really. We had an oath to uphold," Ragnarok said. "And a debt to discharge, a moral one, if not a financial one. We should have pushed harder earlier." He paused, and there was something in the pause that was as close to an apology as the director of Gringotts was likely to come. "We did not. You got me here in the end," Harry said. He stood, straightened his too large jacket, tucked the card into the pocket that now held 3 documents and a weight of consequence that would have flattened most people much larger than him. He held out his hand. Ragnarok looked at it. Then, with the careful deliberateness of a very dignified being doing something it had decided was worth the dignity, he reached forward and shook it. His grip was iron. Harry's grip was small but absolutely firm. "Mr. Potter," Ragnarok said. "Should you need us, we are here." "I know," Harry said. "I'll be back." He walked out through the office door, down the corridor, through the main hall where every goblin had turned by a fraction again to track him, through the bronze doors and down the marble steps and into Diagon Alley, which was properly alive now in the middle of the day. He stood on the cobblestones for a moment, hands in his jacket pockets, card against his chest, and let himself feel the size of what had just happened. Someone had stolen from him. Had placed him in a cupboard and paid his jailers for the service. Had rerouted his family's wealth through charities with careful names, had blocked his letters, had arranged the world so that Harry Potter would grow up knowing nothing of what was his. And this morning, Harry Potter had walked into Gringotts alone, at 6 years old, and had taken the first piece of it back. He walked back through the leaky cauldron. Tom the barman looked up from behind the counter and opened his mouth, and Harry looked at him and Tom closed it again and nodded instead, which was the right call. Harry went through the pub and out onto Charing Cross Road and turned toward the tube station with the steady purposeful stride of someone who had a train to catch and a great deal to think about. He was back at Privet Drive before dinner. The kitchen drawer was already open when he came in through the back door. Petunia was standing at the counter with her back to him again, rigid as a post, hands flat on the formica. Vernon was not home yet, his car wasn't in the drive. Dudley was somewhere upstairs, televised noise filtering down through the ceiling. Harry closed the door behind him. Petunia spoke without turning around. "Where have you been?" It wasn't a question. It was the sentence of someone who had been standing at a counter for hours working up to something. "London," Harry said. She turned. Her face was complicated. Anger was in it, and fear, and something underneath both that Harry had never seen clearly on her face before but recognized as the cousin of guilt. Her eyes went to the jacket pocket where, to her, nothing was visible, but she seemed to know anyway. "The letter was for me," Harry said. "You knew that." "You are 6 years old," Petunia said. "You had no business, it was my letter," Harry said. "My money. My family." His voice was even. "Somebody has been taking from me since I was a baby, Aunt Petunia. Including you." The color drained from her face in stages. "I don't know what you think 500 galleons a month," Harry said. "Since December 1981. The Guardian Provision Fund. You were told it was for my care." He watched her face. "I've seen the records." Petunia's mouth opened. Closed. "I'm not here to fight with you," Harry said. It was true. The fire in his chest was steady and controlled, and he had more important things to spend it on than this woman's discomfort. "I'm telling you because the payments have stopped. They stopped today. Whatever you were using the money for, it's done." Petunia's hands were shaking slightly. She gripped the counter edge. "You can't, you're a child, you can't just." "I already did," Harry said simply. "Gringotts did it. That's their job." She stared at him. He watched her work through it, the disbelief, the calculation, the place where she arrived at the understanding that something had shifted and couldn't be shifted back. Something moved across her face then, something complicated and old and painful, and for a moment she looked less like Aunt Petunia and more like just a person who had made choices and was beginning to feel their weight. "Lily would have," she started, and stopped. Harry waited. She didn't finish the sentence. He wasn't sure she could. "I'm going to have dinner and go to bed," Harry said. "And tomorrow things will continue as normal. For now." He held her gaze for one more moment. "But I know what I know. And I know what I'm owed. And I won't be in that cupboard forever." He walked past her to the hall. He didn't rush. He didn't need to. Behind him, Petunia didn't move for a very long time. At 9:30 that evening, in an office that smelled of lemon drops and old paper and the particular kind of authority that had been accumulated over decades and never questioned, an envelope arrived on Albus Dumbledore's desk. It was delivered not by Owl but by a goblin courier who had appeared in the fireplace, placed the envelope on the desk with the precise care of someone handling a formal instrument of war, said, "Director Ragnarok's compliments, Headmaster," and stepped back into the flames before Dumbledore had fully risen from his chair. He picked up the envelope. The seal was Gringotts gold. He had seen it before, in correspondence that was always routine, always manageable, always the sort of administrative notation that powerful men dealt with between larger concerns. He opened it with the calm of a man who had opened thousands of difficult letters and had always found a way to address what was inside them. He read the first page. Then he read it again. His face, throughout, remained almost entirely still, the trained stillness of someone who had learned, over a very long life, that reactions were information given to the wrong people. But his eyes moved across the words: unauthorized access, audit finding, accounts frozen, petition for financial emancipation filed and confirmed, signatory code 7 identified and catalogued, Phoenix Fund suspended pending investigation, and behind those eyes, something moved that wasn't calm at all. He turned to the second page. The list of dates. The list of amounts. His own signatories, itemized with goblin precision, each one annotated with the legal statute it violated under banking charter. At the bottom, in Ragnarok's script, these findings have been submitted to the Wisengamot Registry as required under Article 7 of the Banking Transparency Act. Copies have been filed with our legal department and retained in our permanent records. The account holder Harry James Potter has been fully briefed and has authorized all actions taken. Dumbledore set the letter down. Folded his hands. Outside the tall windows of his office, the Hogwarts grounds lay quiet in the dark, the lake a flat mirror under a half-moon. He sat with the letter for a long time, thinking with the unhurried thoroughness of a man whose mind worked best when it wasn't interrupted. He had been planning, carefully and with great patience, for years. The shape of what needed to happen, the sacrifice, the preparation, the long-game positioning of a boy who needed to become something specific at the right moment, was so clear in his mind that he had stopped questioning it the way you stopped questioning a map you'd been reading for long enough. The boy was supposed to grow up humble. Ignorant of the scope of his legacy. Free of the arrogance that wealth and power could create in a child. He was supposed to arrive at Hogwarts ready to be shaped, grateful for the world he was being introduced to, and most importantly, trusting of the people who introduced it to him. He was not supposed to have walked into Gringotts at 6 years old and frozen Dumbledore's accounts. Albus looked at the letter one more time. Then he looked at the portrait behind his desk, not the sleeping ones of his predecessors, but the small, separate frame that held a pair of eyes he still went to when he needed to think. They were open tonight and watching him with the complicated love and grief and rebuke that they always held for him. "I know," he said quietly. "I know." He stood. Moved to the window. Looked out at the dark. Harry Potter was 6 years old and living in a cupboard in Surrey and had just, through nothing but his own instinct and courage and the particular stubborn fire that his mother had always carried, done something that Albus had not accounted for in any version of his plan. And the thing that sat in Albus Dumbledore's chest as he stood at the window, beneath the calculation, beneath the strategic rearrangement already beginning to happen, was something he wouldn't have named if asked, and something he wouldn't have examined closely, but that functioned remarkably like a very old guilt finally, after years of being manageable, beginning to hurt. He turned from the window. There was a great deal to do. Chapter 3, Letters like blades. The thing about being 6 and having just legally dismantled a significant portion of someone's financial infrastructure was that you still had to go to school on Monday. Harry sat in the second row of Mrs. Pembroke's class and copied letters off the board with the careful deliberateness of someone who had spent a weekend reading goblin legal documents and found the compare and contrast slightly disorienting. Around him, 23 other 6-year-olds were in various states of attention. Harriet Davies was chewing her pencil, Marcus Webb was drawing rockets in the margin of his worksheet, and Dudley was in the back row doing absolutely nothing with the confident authority of someone who expected others to manage the consequences. Mrs. Pembroke was explaining the letter Q. Harry wrote Q. He wrote it very neatly, the way he wrote everything, because neatness was something he could control, and he had always been particular about the things he could control. In his jacket pocket, hung on the back of the chair because it was July and warm, was the Gringotts client card, the audit finding, his parents' will, and the notification letter that had started everything. He kept them with him because the alternative was leaving them somewhere the Dursleys might find them, and he was not doing that. He'd spent Saturday and Sunday thinking. Not frantically, he wasn't the frantic type, had never been able to afford it, but with the methodical patience of someone sorting through a large problem by its component parts. He'd laid everything out in his mind the way he'd seen people on television lay out maps before a journey, finding the edges first and then working inward. What he knew, his vaults had been robbed. The man responsible was Albus Dumbledore, who was also, technically, his guardian. The Dursleys had taken money meant for his care and given him none of it. His parents' actual chosen guardian was in prison. His parents' will had been ignored. What he had, the audit finding, which was now filed with the Wizarding registry, which meant it was a matter of public record. The financial emancipation, which meant nobody could touch his money. The Gringotts card, which meant his communications couldn't be blocked. And the will, which laid out exactly what his parents had wanted. What he needed, someone in the wizarding world who wasn't Dumbledore and who could act on his behalf in the legal and political spaces Gringotts couldn't reach. He'd thought about this carefully. Ragnarok had said he needed representation. He'd thought about who, in a world he barely knew, might be willing to listen to a 6-year-old with a mountain of evidence and a very clear sense of direction. Mrs. Pembroke asked the class to use Queen in a sentence. Harry wrote, "The Queen owns her palace and nobody can take it." Mrs. Pembroke looked at this for a moment when she passed his desk, and moved on without comment. The letters went out on Tuesday. Harry had drafted them over the weekend in the back of an exercise book, working through multiple versions with the careful revision of someone who understood that words were tools and the right words in the right order were a specific kind of weapon. He'd had to look up several spellings in the dictionary Dudley had been given for school and had never opened. He'd been as precise as he could be, given that he was 6 and working from memory and instinct. The Gringotts card included, among its other features, access to the Goblin Courier network. The instructions for use were printed on the inside of the card case in extremely small text that Harry had read 3 times with his nose almost touching the paper. To send a letter via Goblin Courier, you wrote the letter, addressed it, held the card against the envelope, and said, "Gringotts deliver." The card would warm in your hand, the envelope would vanish, and the message would be delivered by personal Goblin Courier within the day, to any address in Britain, with confirmation of receipt returned to sender. He sent 5 letters. The first went to Ragnarok, confirming that he wanted to proceed with all actions discussed and requesting that Ragnarok recommend a solicitor who specialized in wizarding estate and guardianship law. He also asked Ragnarok to pull all records relating to Sirius Black's imprisonment, specifically whether a trial had taken place, because Harry had been thinking about the will and the word convenient and couldn't let it go. The second went to the office of Amelia Bones, director of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, whose name and position he'd found in a very old copy of the Daily Prophet that had been lining Hedwig's. He stopped. There was no Hedwig. Not yet. That had been in a story someone had told him, or a dream, or, he wasn't sure. He had the sense sometimes of a life that should have happened, running alongside the one that did, like a shadow with different edges. He filed it away and kept moving. He'd found Amelia Bones' name and position in a copy of Which Broomstick magazine that had been in the pile of wizarding materials he'd accumulated from his late-night investigations over the years, the occasional magical publication that slipped through the Dursleys' defenses, catalogued and hidden under the loose floorboard in his cupboard. He addressed the letter formally, Director Bones, and explained, in clear and unemotional language, that he was Harry Potter, that he had conducted an audit of his family's vaults at Gringotts, that the results had revealed criminal misappropriation of funds, and that he was writing to request that the DMLE be aware of the matter as it proceeded. He enclosed a summary of the audit findings. The third went to the Wizarding Registry Office, formally requesting that the House Potter seat be placed in active status and that until Harry reached majority, the proxy be managed by Gringotts as his designated institutional representative. He'd found the procedure for this in a pamphlet that Ironhook had slipped into his file before he'd left, procedures for the activation of dormant hereditary Wizarding seats, dry as chalk but useful. The fourth was the one he spent the most time on. It went to Albus Dumbledore. It was short. He'd drafted it 11 times and the final version was 6 sentences. Dear Professor Dumbledore, I am writing to inform you that I have been to Gringotts and have conducted a full audit of my family's vaults. I am aware of all unauthorized withdrawals made using the A7 signatory code and the Hogwarts headmaster code. I have petitioned for and received financial emancipation. Gringotts has frozen all accounts associated with unauthorized access. I have read my parents' will. I look forward to meeting you. Harry James Potter, Lord of House Potter. He read it over one more time. It said everything it needed to. It said nothing extra. He sealed it and sent it. The fifth letter was the shortest and the one he was least certain about, because it was the most personal and personal things were harder to get right. It went to the prison facility at Azkaban, addressed to Sirius Orion Black, and said, My name is Harry Potter. You were meant to be my guardian. I've read my parents' will and I know you were their first choice. I also know you never had a trial. I'm working on that. I thought you should know someone is. He held the card against that envelope for a long moment before he said the words. Then the envelope vanished, and he sat in the dark of the cupboard and stared at the space where it had been. The replies came in a way that told him a great deal about the people sending them. Ragnarok's confirmation arrived first, within 2 hours of Harry's letter, a response that was crisp and organized, confirming all actions were proceeding. Attached to it was the name and address of one Griselda Marchbanks, former head of the Wizarding Examinations Authority and currently practicing as a specialist in magical estate law. She is sharp, incorruptible, and deeply irritated by anyone who abuses their authority, Ragnarok had written, in what Harry was coming to recognize as the Goblin's version of a warm recommendation. She will not be daunted by the political dimensions of your case. I have taken the liberty of alerting her to your situation. She is expecting your contact. Also enclosed, the preliminary records on Sirius Black's imprisonment. Harry read them at 3 a.m. by torchlight. There had been no trial. He read it twice to make sure he wasn't misunderstanding. A man had been arrested and put in the worst prison in the wizarding world, and nobody had given him a trial. The file showed an arrest record, a transport order signed by Bartemius Crouch Sr. And then nothing, no court date, no hearing, no conviction, no verdict. Just Azkaban, indefinitely, on the assumption of guilt. Harry put the file down. Picked it up again. Read the arrest record more carefully. Sirius Black had been charged with betraying the Potters to Voldemort, and with killing 12 Muggles and a wizard named Peter Pettigrew with a single curse. Harry didn't know much about magic yet, but he was logical, and logic suggested that if you killed someone with a single curse, there would be a body. The file listed no body for Pettigrew, only a finger, found at the scene. He thought about that for a long time. Then he wrote a note to Ragnarok, Can you find out what happened to Peter Pettigrew? The file says there was no body. That seems important. Amelia Bones' reply came the next day and was the reply he'd been most uncertain about, because she was Ministry and the Ministry had not covered itself in reliability so far. He held the envelope for a moment, delivered by Goblin Courier, warm and official, before opening it. Mr. Potter, I will be direct with you because the situation warrants it. I received your letter yesterday morning. I spent the afternoon reading the audit summary you enclosed and then the registered copy of the audit finding that Gringotts filed with the Wizarding, which I obtained independently. What you have uncovered is serious. I do not use that word lightly. I have been in this department for 19 years and I have seen a great deal of what influential people can do when they believe they are not being watched. I want you to know that the DMLE is aware of this matter and that I personally am watching it. I cannot promise you the ministry will move quickly. I will be honest that there are political complications I am already anticipating. But I can promise you that I will not let this be buried. I would also like to meet with you, when that is possible and safe to arrange. There are things about your situation that require in-person conversation. There is one other thing. You asked, in your letter, that I be aware of Sirius Black's imprisonment. I want you to know that I have pulled his file. It is concerning. I am looking into it. Amelia Bones, Director, DMLE. Harry read the letter 3 times. He had the instinct, developed through 6 years of reading adults who were not what they presented themselves as, of someone who could sense honesty the way you could sense cold air under a door. Amelia Bones felt honest. Brisk and careful and dealing with complications he couldn't fully see yet, but honest. He wrote back, "Thank you. I would like to meet when you think it's safe. I am at Privet Drive but I can travel to London. Please let me know through the Goblin Courier so the letters can't be blocked." Dumbledore's reply came on Thursday. Harry had been waiting for it with the particular quality of attention you gave to something you knew was coming but couldn't fully predict. He'd imagined several versions: anger, denial, condescension, the elaborate justifications of someone who had been explaining himself to himself for long enough that the justifications had become indistinguishable from truth. He had not imagined what actually arrived. The letter was handwritten, in a flowing, elegant script that moved across cream paper with the ease of someone who had written thousands of important letters. The ink was blue-black. The tone was warm. Precisely, carefully, perfectly warm, the warmth of a fire that had been lit and positioned to maximum effect. "Dear Harry, what a remarkable thing, to hear from you. I have thought of you so often over these years and hoped you were well. The fact that you found your way to Gringotts speaks to your parents' courage living in you, and I find myself profoundly moved by it. I understand you have questions about the administration of your family's estate. These are completely natural questions, and I want you to know that I welcome the opportunity to explain everything to you in full. There is a great deal of context you are missing, Harry, context that I would very much like to provide in person, where I can answer all of your concerns properly. The funds you have identified were not stolen. They were managed on your behalf, in service of protecting you and the wider wizarding world, as I am confident you will understand when we have spoken. The Phoenix Fund in particular was established specifically to ensure that the forces who killed your parents could not return, a cause which I know is dear to your heart. I would like very much to visit you at Privet Drive and have a proper conversation. I believe that once you understand the full picture, you will see that everything that has been done for you, and for the world you will one day protect. With great warmth and very real pride in the young man you are already becoming, Albus Dumbledore. Harry sat with this letter for a long time. He was 6, but he was not naive. He read that letter the way he'd learned to read everything, not just for what it said but for the shape of what it didn't say, the spaces where important things should have been and weren't. There was no apology. There was no acknowledgement that taking money from an orphan child's vault without authorization was wrong. There was the word context, used the way a door was used, something you could stand behind when you didn't want to be seen clearly. There was "I believe that once you understand," which was not an explanation, it was a prediction about how Harry would feel when he was managed correctly. And there was the suggestion of a visit. Harry thought about that for a while. He picked up his pen, thought about what his mother had written in the margin of her will, and wrote his reply. "Dear Professor Dumbledore, thank you for your letter. I do not believe the funds were managed on my behalf. I believe Gringotts, whose records are precise and whose oath is absolute, when they tell me what happened. I am happy to be presented with evidence that contradicts their findings, but a letter explaining that there is context is not evidence. I will not be at Privet Drive for the foreseeable future, so a visit there would not be productive. Any communication between us should go through my legal representative, Griselda Marchbanks, or through Gringotts. I read my parents' will. I noticed that you were their third choice of guardian. I am curious about the circumstances that made their first 2 choices unavailable, and I look forward to understanding the full picture, as you put it, when those circumstances are properly examined. Yours, Harry James Potter. He sealed it and sent it. Then he leaned back against the wall of his cupboard and felt the particular satisfaction of someone who had said exactly the right thing in exactly the right number of words. Griselda Marchbanks arrived at Privet Drive on Friday. Harry had not told the Dursleys she was coming, partly because he hadn't known precisely when she would appear and partly because he found that presenting the Dursleys with accomplished facts was more efficient than presenting them with plans they could attempt to disrupt. He heard the knock at the front door from the kitchen where he was washing up after breakfast, and dried his hands, and went to the hallway. Petunia was already at the door. She'd opened it the 6 inches she opened all unexpected doors, the investigative gap, Harry thought of it, and was looking out with the expression she used for people who didn't appear to belong on Privet Drive, which was most people. "Mrs. Dursley." The voice outside was clear and sharp and had the quality of someone who was accustomed to being listened to. "My name is Griselda Marchbanks. I represent Harry Potter. I believe he is your ward." Petunia's back stiffened. "I don't know what I know exactly what I am," Marchbanks said. "And I know exactly what you are, and what you've been paid to be, and how that arrangement has recently and definitively concluded. I suggest you open the door the full way." Petunia opened the door the full way. Griselda Marchbanks was a small woman, probably in her mid-70s, with white hair cut practically short and eyes that were the sharp, clear gray of someone who had spent decades assessing complicated situations and was not remotely impressed by any of them. She was dressed in what appeared to be very severe Muggle clothes, a dark jacket, sensible shoes, with one concession to her other world, a pin at her lapel in the shape of a quill, set with a small stone that caught the light in a way nothing in Surrey usually did. She looked at Petunia with the unimpressed attention of a person who had once examined OWL candidates for 50 years and was familiar with all varieties of attempting to hide what you knew. Then she looked past Petunia and found Harry, and something in her expression shifted, not soft, not pitying, but a kind of precise assessment that resolved quickly into recognition. "Harry Potter," she said. "Mrs. Marchbanks," Harry said. "Come in." Petunia looked between them. She seemed to be working out something about the nature of power and who currently had it, and arriving at an answer she found deeply uncomfortable. She moved aside. They sat in the living room, Harry on the sofa, Marchbanks in the armchair that was usually Vernon's, which Harry found mildly satisfying. Petunia hovered in the doorway. "You can go," Harry told her. "This is my house," Petunia said. "And I'm your ward," Harry said. "So anything discussed about my legal affairs is confidential. You can stay if you want, but you won't be able to use anything you hear." He looked at Marchbanks. "Is that right?" "Precisely right," Marchbanks said, with the satisfaction of someone who had been waiting to see if her new client would understand the framework. "Client representative privilege applies. Mrs. Dursley is welcome to remain as a piece of furniture." She looked at Petunia. "Those are literally your 2 options." Petunia left. Marchbanks opened a leather briefcase that had appeared from somewhere and produced a file that was already substantial. "I've reviewed everything Ragnarok sent me. The audit finding, the emancipation petition, the will, the black custody records." She looked at Harry across the low table. "You have been busy for someone your size." "I had time," Harry said. "Cupboards are quiet." Marchbanks looked at him for a moment. Then she opened the file and got to work, because she was a woman who understood that acknowledging injustice and addressing it were different tasks and right now they needed to address it. "First things. The financial emancipation is solid. Ragnarok executed it correctly and under the right statute, I checked. Nobody is touching your vaults." She turned a page. "Second, the Wisengamot seat. Your request to activate it with Gringotts as proxy manager has been received. I have added a formal supporting motion. It should be actioned within the month." "And Dumbledore's guardianship?" Harry asked. "Trickier," Marchbanks said, with the directness of someone who didn't soften things without reason. "Financial emancipation removes him from your financial affairs entirely. But residential guardianship is a separate designation under ministry family law, and challenging it requires either a court hearing or the activation of a prior custody designation. She looked at him. Your parents will designate Sirius Black as primary guardian. If Black can be exonerated, he never had a trial, Harry said. No, Marchbank said. He didn't. Bartemius Crouch Sr. had him imprisoned under wartime emergency powers that were supposed to expire within 18 months of the end of hostilities. They did expire. The detention became illegal. Nobody in the ministry moved to correct this. She said it with the measured, crisp outrage of someone who had been outraged by it for years and had not yet had an angle to act. Amelia Bones is reviewing his file now. I know, Harry said. She wrote to me. Marchbanks looked at him. Yes, Ragnarok mentioned you'd already contacted her. She's honest, Harry said. I can tell. She is, Marchbanks agreed. She's also politically exposed on this. Sirius Black's imprisonment was signed off by people who are still powerful. She'll push, but she'll need something solid to push with. Harry thought about Ragnarok's preliminary note on Peter Pettigrew and the missing body. I've asked Gringotts to look into something that might help with that. I'll let you know when I have more. Marchbanks looked at him with the clear, sharp grey eyes. You're 6. People keep saying that, Harry said. I keep finding it difficult to internalize, she said. She turned another page. Now. Dumbledore. The audit finding is filed and registered. The freeze is in place. He wrote to you. Yes. Harry had brought the letter. He passed it across. Marchbanks read it in about 40 seconds, set it down, and looked at him. And you replied? He passed her that too. She read it and set it down with the careful deliberateness of someone placing an item they respected. Well, she said. Was it right? Harry asked. It was exactly right, she said. You shut down every avenue he was trying to open and you did it without being rude enough to give him anything to use. She tapped the letter with one finger. He is going to try to visit. He will not accept the redirection to legal counsel, not initially. He'll come to Privet Drive, Harry said. Yes. And if he does? He has no legal right to force access to you. Financial guardianship has been revoked. The Dursleys are no longer receiving payments and no longer have a contractual obligation to facilitate his access. They never did, officially, but the money created a kind of practical obligation. She closed the file. If he comes here, you don't have to speak to him. You don't have to open the door. You are entitled to have me present for any interaction. Harry thought about this. I'm not afraid of him, he said. Marchbanks studied him carefully. No, she said, with a note in her voice that might have been concern and might have been something else entirely. I can see that. Is that a problem? It might be, she said honestly. He is very powerful and very intelligent and he has been doing this for a very long time. His instinct, I expect, will be to charm you. To make you feel understood and valued and that all of this was a terrible misunderstanding that can be resolved between the two of you personally, without lawyers or banks in the way. I read the letter, Harry said. He already tried that. He'll try it in person better. And I'll be better in person too, Harry said. Marchbanks looked at him for a long moment. Then she did something that told Harry she was going to be very good at this job. She didn't try to talk him out of it, or reassure him, or protect him from a difficult thing. She nodded once, closed her briefcase, and stood. I'll be in touch when Bones has movement on Black, she said. In the meantime, anything Dumbledore sends you, you send a copy to me immediately. Any attempt to contact you directly through non-courier means, owls, flu, anything, you document and report. Yes, Harry said. He stood too, because it seemed right. Mrs. Marchbanks. Thank you for taking this. She paused. Ragnarok told me what you did, she said. 6 years old, Surrey to Gringotts on a commuter train with £4 and a letter. She said it the way you said things that were stated facts, and that was all they needed to be. This case needed someone willing to start it. Most people in your position would not have been. She picked up her briefcase. I am glad you were. She walked to the door. Stopped once. Your mother was a remarkable witch, she said, not turning around. I examined her. Brightest practical magic I saw in 40 years of examinations. She paused. I see her in your letters. The clarity of thought. The refusal to accept premises that haven't been earned. She opened the door. She would have found a way to be proud of this. She left. Harry stood in the Dursleys' living room for a moment, in the mid-morning quiet, with the particular fullness of someone who had been told something true that they needed to hear. Then he went back to the kitchen and finished the washing up, because it still needed doing. The Wisingamot notification arrived that afternoon, not by owl or courier but by something else, a soft golden light that appeared on the kitchen table while Harry was peeling potatoes and resolved into a flat, official card with an embossed crest. He looked at it without touching it for a moment, because he'd read enough about magical objects by now to approach unfamiliar ones carefully. It resolved to text, Notice of Registration. The hereditary seat of House Potter on the Wisingamot of Great Britain and Northern Ireland has been placed in active status as of this date. Proxy management assigned to Gringotts Wizarding Bank per petition. Seat reference HP 11 Hereditary. Harry read it twice. Looked at it for a moment. Put it in his jacket with the other documents. The potato needed peeling. He kept going. Across London, in a ministry office that was larger and better furnished than most but that Amelia Bones still found deeply insufficient for the scope of what she was dealing with, she set down Harry's second letter and looked at the black file on her desk, and then at the summary of the Pettigrew case beside it, and then at the wall, which told her nothing useful but was where she looked when she was thinking hard. She'd been a law enforcement officer for 19 years. She'd seen things filed incorrectly, cases dropped under pressure, evidence misplaced in ways that were never quite provable as intentional. She'd learned to read the patterns those things left, the way water left marks even after it dried. The black file left patterns everywhere. No trial record. No hearing transcript. An arrest order signed by Crouch, who had never been fond of due process when due process interfered with outcomes he'd already decided on. A charge sheet that listed 12 Muggle deaths and the death of Peter Pettigrew, but Pettigrew's death record only noted remains, consistent with a fatality, not a confirmed body. And one more thing, buried in the file 3/4 of the way through the secondary documentation, the kind of place where things got put when someone wanted them technically filed but not easily found, a witness statement from a Muggle who had been present at the scene, taken by Muggle police and passed to the Ministry in the standard cross-agency notification. The Muggle had said the man who caused the explosion, the bearded man, the laughing man, had produced something from his pocket and disappeared before the smoke cleared. Disappeared. Not died. Not been destroyed. Disappeared. Amelia sat with this for a long time. Then she called her assistant in and said, "Find me everything we have on Peter Pettigrew. Birth record, school record, ministry contacts, any surveillance files from the war years. And seal this office. I don't want anyone knowing what I'm looking at until I've decided what to look for next." Her assistant, who had been with her for 11 years and understood her well enough to not ask questions when she used that voice, nodded and went to do it. Amelia looked at the black file again. Then she picked up a quill and wrote a note to Ragnarok at Gringotts. "You mentioned a query about Pettigrew. I have the same query. Let's compare notes. I will use your courier network to ensure privacy." Up. She sealed it and sent it. Somewhere in Azkaban, in a cell that was dark and cold and full of the sounds of things that weren't there, a man who had been inside for nearly 5 years was holding a small envelope that had appeared through the bars in a way it shouldn't have been able to and was reading a letter for the 4th time because he was having trouble believing it was real. "My name is Harry Potter. You were meant to be my guardian." Sirius Black had not cried since the first week. He'd stopped because it hadn't helped and because the Dementors fed on it, and he'd learned to go somewhere inside himself that the Dementors couldn't quite reach, a cold, still place where he held on to the fact of his own innocence the way you held on to a rock in a current. He'd been holding that for 5 years. It had kept him sane, barely, in the way that barely sane was still better than the alternative. He read the letter again. I know you never had a trial. I'm working on that. I thought you should know someone is. His hands were shaking. He was aware of that. He pressed them flat against the stone floor and breathed. Harry Potter was alive. Harry Potter was 6 years old and had somehow gotten a letter into Azkaban and was working on Sirius's situation, which was, he wanted to laugh, he wanted to sob, he wanted to do several things simultaneously that were not compatible with the confines of an Azkaban cell. He looked at the letter one more time. Pressed it to his chest. Closed his eyes. I thought you should know someone is. Someone was. For the first time in 5 years, Sirius Black let himself want something, not just innocence, not just survival, but the actual specific future of walking out of this place and meeting the boy who had written to him, this child who had somehow inherited all of James's stubbornness and, from the evidence of this letter, something of Lily's precision. He wanted to meet him. That want was going to keep him going for a while. Dumbledore's second letter arrived Saturday morning. It was longer than the first, and the warmth in it was layered more carefully, and there were 3 paragraphs that Harry recognized as doing significant work underneath their surface cordiality. He read it carefully, noted the places where Dumbledore was maneuvering and the places where he was genuinely uncertain. Those were visible too, the slight changes in rhythm that happened when someone was writing something they hadn't fully planned, and he sent it to Marchbanks without responding to it himself. Her reply came within an hour. Good. Do not reply. Let him wait. Silence from your end is valuable right now. Harry put the letter away and thought about that. He understood what she meant. Silence was its own kind of pressure, its own kind of message. But there was something else too. He'd noticed, in Dumbledore's second letter, one line that was different from the rest. Not warmly manipulative, not strategically positioned. One line that felt real. I find myself deeply troubled by what you must think of me. Harry had underlined it in pencil. He thought about it now, sitting in the cupboard in the afternoon quiet. He didn't think Dumbledore was a straightforward villain. He was smart enough to know that the world didn't usually produce those. He thought Dumbledore was something more complicated and in some ways worse, a person who was genuinely brilliant and genuinely caring, who had made a decision years ago that he was the right person to decide what was best for other people, and had never once questioned whether that was his call to make. That one line, deeply troubled by what you must think of me, was the line of a person who still cared about being seen as good. That was the thing Harry had to understand about him. Not that he was evil. That he was convinced he wasn't, and that the conviction had done as much damage as malice would have, and in some ways more, because malice at least was honest about what it was. Harry sat with that understanding for a while. Then he took out the exercise book he'd been using as a journal since Thursday and wrote it down, because he thought it was the kind of thing that was easy to forget when Dumbledore was in the room being warm and certain and exactly what he'd practiced being. He needed to remember it. He was going to need it. Sunday was quiet. Vernon mowed the lawn with the furious energy of someone who couldn't address the actual source of his frustration and was taking it out on the grass. Petunia cleaned with the same furious energy, working through the house with a cloth and a spray bottle as if she could scour away the events of the week. Dudley watched television and ate biscuits and was largely irrelevant to everything. Harry sat in the back garden in a patch of afternoon sun and read the book Marchbanks had enclosed with her last letter, a thin, dense volume called An Heir's Guide to Wizarding Law and Lineage Rights, which was out of print and not widely known and was exactly the kind of thing that people with power preferred not to be widely known. He read carefully, dog-earing pages, making notes in the margins in small neat handwriting. He was learning the landscape he was moving through. The more of it he understood, the better he could navigate it. The sun moved. Birds made their Sunday afternoon sounds. Somewhere a few streets over, children were playing in a garden. Harry turned a page and kept reading. He was 6 years old and he had frozen a powerful man's bank accounts, activated a hereditary Wizarding seat, retained a top legal specialist, set the Department of Magical Law Enforcement investigating an unjust imprisonment, and written a letter to the man who should have been his family. He thought about the line from his mother's will. Please be magnificently, impossibly difficult for anyone who tries to tell you who you should be. He was working on it. Chapter 4, The Godfather in Azkaban. The Pettigrew file arrived from Ragnarok on a Wednesday, 3 weeks after Harry had first asked for it, and it was thick enough that Harry had to hide it in 3 separate locations in the cupboard, some under the loose floorboard, some folded into the spine of a broken book, some tucked into the toe of a shoe he didn't wear. Goblin couriers had an admirable talent for discretion, but they couldn't do much about the volume of physical paper, and Petunia had been watching him with the careful attention of someone waiting for a reason. He read it in pieces over 3 nights. The picture it assembled was not what he'd expected, because he hadn't gone in expecting anything specific. He'd followed a thread, no body, disappeared before the smoke cleared, and let it lead where it went. What it led to was strange enough that he read certain sections twice, holding the torch close, moving his lips slightly on the difficult words. Peter Pettigrew had been at Hogwarts with his parents. That Harry already knew from the will and the broader documents he'd accumulated. What the Gringotts file added was financial. Pettigrew had been receiving small, irregular deposits into a dormant ministry account since 1975, payments that were categorized as informant compensation and signed off by a Department of Magical Security code that Ragnarok's annotation identified as having been decommissioned in 1982. After October 31, 1981, the deposits stopped. Before they stopped, the last payment was October 29, 2 days before his parents died. 2 days before. Harry sat with that in the dark for a long time. He also sat with the forensic summary that Amelia Bones had apparently shared with Ragnarok for cross-referencing, a document marked restricted, which Amelia had sent through Goblin Courier with a note that said simply, "This is what I have. Tell me what you see." The forensic summary described the scene on Godric's Hollow Street where Pettigrew had allegedly been killed. 12 dead muggles, confirmed. 1 finger, right index, confirmed as Pettigrew's by Ministry Magical Forensics. Everything else, the crater, the scorch marks, the wand found abandoned, all consistent with a very large explosion. What wasn't consistent, and what the original investigating team had noted and then not pursued, was the directionality of the blast pattern. The explosion had originated from the ground, not from a wand discharge. Harry read Ragnarok's annotation beside this, a staged scene. The finger removed prior to detonation of a preset charge. Standard KGB-era approach, per our Muggle intelligence contacts. The caster would have been standing clear of the radius. Harry didn't know what KGB meant. He wrote it down to look up later. What he understood was the core of it, the explosion had been set in advance, not cast in the moment. Which meant the man everyone assumed was dead had set it up himself, taken off his own finger, and run. He wrote to Amelia, the blast was staged. Pettigrew is alive. He was a paid informant, there's a payment record from 2 days before my parents died. Ragnarok has the file. You need to see all of it together. He wrote to Marchbanks, we need to move on Sirius quickly. I think I know where this is going, but someone else might figure it out first and Pettigrew could disappear properly. He wrote to Ragnarok, can Gringotts run a financial trace on Pettigrew's informant account? If the account was dormant but not closed, and if he's alive somewhere, he might have tried to access it. Then he put everything back in its hiding places, turned off the torch, and lay in the dark with his knees pulled up and his mind moving through the problem the way it moved through everything, steadily, without panic, finding the pieces and placing them. He was 6 years old and he was building a case for his godfather's exoneration from inside a cupboard in Surrey at 2 in the morning, and the particular absurdity of this was not lost on him. He filed it alongside the other absurdities he'd been collecting. He went to sleep. Marchbanks came back on Friday, this time with a colleague. Harry heard 2 sets of footsteps on the front path and was at the door before Petunia could reach it, which was a small tactical victory. He opened the door himself. Marchbanks was there, same sharp eyes, same dark jacket, same quill pin. Beside her was a man Harry hadn't seen before, tall, heavy-set, with close-cropped grey hair and the careful physical stillness of someone who had spent years in rooms where sudden movements caused problems. He was carrying a briefcase and wearing what looked like Muggle clothes that he wasn't entirely comfortable in, jacket slightly wrong, tie slightly too tight. His eyes when he looked at Harry were the eyes of someone doing a rapid and thorough assessment. "Harry," Marchbanks said. "This is Bertrand Ogilvy. He's a barrister, the wizarding kind, which is what we need now." "You're the one who writes the letters," Ogilvy said. His voice was low and deliberate. He wasn't asking, he was confirming something he'd apparently already decided. "Yes," Harry said. He stepped back from the door. "Come in." They sat in the living room again. Petunia had retreated to the kitchen with the speed of someone who had learned that retreating was less unpleasant than the alternative. Dudley was at a friend's house. Vernon was at work. The house was theirs. Harry laid the Pettigrew file on the table between them, all 3 sections of it, reassembled in the correct order. Marchbanks had seen the summary but not the full file. Ogilvy hadn't seen any of it. Harry watched them read, sitting still, hands on his knees. Ogilvy finished first, set down the last page, and looked at Harry with an expression that had moved from assessment into something more specific. "Who put this together?" he asked. "Gringotts compiled most of it," Harry said. "Director Ragnarok. The forensic summary came from Director Bones at the DMLE. "And you synthesized it," Ogilvy said. "Yes. The informant payment 2 days prior," Marchbanks said, still reading the last section. "That puts Pettigrew as the source who gave the Potter's location to Voldemort, not Black." "The Fidelius charm," Harry said. Both adults looked at him. "I read about it in the law book you gave me," he said to Marchbanks. "A Fidelius charm is unbreakable from the outside. The location can only be betrayed by the secret keeper. If Sirius was the secret keeper, then he's guilty. But if they switched, if the secret keeper was actually Pettigrew, then it doesn't matter where Sirius was or what he said to anyone, he couldn't have betrayed them. He physically couldn't have. The charm doesn't work that way." Ogilvy sat back in his chair slowly. He looked at Marchbanks. Something passed between them, the look of 2 experienced people recognizing that they were in the presence of something they hadn't expected. "You read about the Fidelius charm in a law book," Ogilvy said. "The section on property and location protection charms," Harry confirmed. "It was relevant. Did you find any documentation of the charm being cast?" Marchbanks asked. "No. But that's the point, isn't it?" Harry said. "If they switched secret keepers secretly, there wouldn't be a record. That was the whole idea, to make people think it was still Sirius so Pettigrew wouldn't be the target. Which also means," he paused, organizing the thought carefully, "which also means that Sirius wasn't arrested because of evidence. He was arrested because everyone assumed. Nobody checked." Ogilvy picked up his briefcase, opened it, and produced a legal pad. He wrote something on it in large, quick letters, looked at it, and turned it face down on the table. He looked at Harry with an expression that was direct and, Harry thought, the beginning of genuine respect. "If I can get a Veritasium hearing," he began. "Can you?" Harry asked. "With this file and Bones pushing from the DMLE side?" "Possibly." He tapped the table with one finger. "Veritasium can't be administered without consent to a ministry prisoner, but Black can consent voluntarily. If I petition for a formal hearing on grounds of illegal imprisonment, the detention becoming illegal after the emergency powers expired, and request Veritasium as part of that hearing, and if Bones can get a sympathetic Wisengamot panel." "Dumbledore chairs the Wisengamot," Harry said. Brief silence. "He does," Ogilvy said carefully. "Would he block it?" Harry asked. Another look between Ogilvy and Marchbanks. This one had more weight. He might, Marchbank said. If Sirius is exonerated, Sirius becomes your legal guardian. Which removes Dumbledore entirely from your life. She was watching Harry as she said it. Harry thought about the letter. Once you understand the full picture, you will see that everything has been done for you. He'd see blocking it as protecting me, he said. He'd tell himself that's why. Yes, Marchbank said. Probably. Can we get around the Wizengamot chair? Harry asked. Ogilvy looked thoughtful. The chief warlock can be recused from a specific hearing on grounds of conflict of interest, he said slowly. If the hearing pertains to a matter in which the chair has a direct personal stake, such as a guardianship arrangement, there is precedent for recusal. He wrote something else on the legal pad. The difficulty is that the recusal motion needs to be filed by a sitting Wizengamot member. Harry looked at him. House Potter has a Wizengamot seat. With Gringotts as proxy, Marchbank said. Can Gringotts file a motion? As proxy for a hereditary seat? Ogilvy turned the legal pad over and wrote rapidly. The proxy relationship has never been used to file motions, it's typically a passive holder designation. But the act that establishes it doesn't prohibit active use. He paused. It's untested. So it might work, Harry said. It might work, Ogilvy agreed. Harry leaned forward. Then Ragnarok should file it. He will, if I ask him. He's been looking for every legal angle since the audit. He paused. Can you draft the recusal motion and I'll get it to Ragnarok? Ogilvy looked at him for the length of time it took to accept something that had surprised him. Then he picked up his quill. Tell me what outcome you want, he said. I'll build it backward from there. Harry wrote to Ragnarok that evening. He laid out the full plan, the recusal motion, the Veritasrum hearing, the connection between the Pettigrew file and the Fidelius theory, in 4 pages that were careful and sequential and that he read back twice before sealing. Ragnarok's response came the next morning. It was 3 sentences, the recusal motion is legally sound. Gringotts will file it as proxy for House Potter. We had also been looking for this angle. Harry read it and felt something unclench slightly in his chest, the relief of a plan aligning, of pieces moving into position. He sat on the edge of his cupboard bed and let himself feel it for exactly 30 seconds. Then he put it away and thought about what was still moving. Dumbledore hadn't tried to visit. Yet. His 3rd letter had arrived the previous week, longer still and more careful, with a new approach, not warmth this time but a kind of formal seriousness, an acknowledgement that Harry had taken legal steps and that Dumbledore respected those steps. There was a phrase in it that Harry had underlined, I hope you will come to understand that my intentions, whatever appearances suggest, have always been in service of your protection. Whatever appearances suggest. Harry had sent that one to Marchbanks too, with a note, he's changing tactics. Less warm. More serious. What does that mean? She'd written back, it means he's decided charm won't work and is trying authenticity. It's more dangerous than the charm. He genuinely believes what he's saying. Harry believed that too. That was what made it dangerous. It was much harder to argue with someone who wasn't lying. He'd not replied to that letter either. Silence was its own kind of answer. What Harry hadn't expected was the response from Azkaban. The goblin courier arrived on a Tuesday morning while Harry was at school, and the letter was waiting for him in the cupboard when he came home, placed there by some mechanism he didn't fully understand yet, appearing on his pillow like it had always been there. He sat on the bed and opened it with hands that were steadier than he felt. The handwriting was difficult, not bad, exactly, but the writing of someone whose hands hadn't had enough practice recently at the fine motor control involved. The letters were larger than they should be, occasionally crowding each other, occasionally drifting from the line. Harry read it slowly and carefully. Harry, I have read your letter 16 times. I counted. I want to tell you that I am fine and that Azkaban is manageable, but I have always been a terrible liar and you are James and Lily's son, so I expect you'd know. It is not fine. It is not manageable. But I have been holding on to something true for 5 years, and your letter made that something true feel real for the first time since they put me here, so I am better than I was. Your father was my best friend. Your mother thought I was a disaster and she was correct, but she loved me anyway, which is the best thing anyone has ever done for me except for your father and except for this letter. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Are you safe? Not safe the way adults use the word, where they mean comfortable and fed and not visibly bleeding. I mean actually safe. I know where they put you. I know who they put you with. Lily told me about her sister once and I remember it. If you are not safe, tell me. I will find a way to help even from here, which is a sentence I cannot currently back up practically but intend sincerely. I also need to tell you something that I don't know what to do with, but that you need to know because it might be useful. The reason I never fought the arrest, the reason I went with them and didn't run, is because I thought I deserved it. Not for betraying your parents, I would never. But Peter was my responsibility. I introduced him to your parents. I vouched for him. I thought he was small and harmless and scared, and I was wrong about all of it, and your parents died because I was wrong about Peter. I have been sitting here for 5 years believing that Azkaban was my punishment for that. Your letter is the first thing that has suggested I might be wrong about that too. I am holding on to it. Sirius Harry read it twice. He sat in the dark for a while. The weight of what was in that letter, not the legal content, not the useful information about Pettigrew, but the simple weight of a person who had been carrying guilt for 5 years that was the wrong shape for the actual thing they'd done, sat in his chest with him. He thought about his mother's note in the will. About what the word loved felt like when he'd read it there. About how the absence of something you'd never had was still an absence, still a specific shape of missing, and how Sirius Black was a person his parents had chosen to be his family, and that the choosing of it meant something regardless of what Dumbledore had decided to do with it. He wrote back that same evening. Sirius, I'm not fine. The cupboard is 3 feet wide. The family they put me with took money from my vaults that was meant for my care and spent it on a new car and smelting school fees for their son. I've been wearing shoes 2 sizes too large for 2 years. But I am not in danger and I am not afraid, and I have a plan for most of it, so please don't do anything from in there that makes things more complicated. Regarding Peter Pettigrew. I need you to confirm something for me, and it's important. Were you the secret keeper for my parents' Videlius charm, or did you switch to Pettigrew before they died? I need the truth of this in writing if you can manage it. Also, you were not responsible for choosing someone who turned out to be a coward and a traitor. You made a judgment about a person and the person hid what they really were. That is his failure, not yours. I'm working on getting you out. There are people helping. Real ones who know what they're doing. Harry, he sealed it and sent it. Then he sat with the letter Sirius had written, refolded carefully, and put it in the jacket with his parents' will and the audit finding and the Gringotts card. He was building a collection of things that mattered. He found that each one made the others feel more real. Sirius's second letter arrived 4 days later. The handwriting was slightly better, steadier, the letters more consistent. Harry noticed that and filed it away as information about what having something to do did to a person who had been without purpose. Harry, I switched. 3 days before Halloween. We thought it was a brilliant misdirection, everyone was watching me, and Peter was so insignificant nobody would bother. That was the whole point. I told no one. Not Dumbledore, not Remus, not anyone. It was just me and James and Lily and Peter. So when they came for me and I didn't deny it, I was in shock. I was standing in the street where Peter had detonated whatever he'd used and there were 12 people dead, and I kept thinking it couldn't be real. And then I was laughing because it was so absurd, and then the Aurors arrived and I thought, let them think it. It doesn't matter. James and Lily are gone and nothing matters. That was the worst decision I have ever made, and I have made extraordinary decisions. This information is yours to use however you need to. Also, a cupboard. 3 feet wide. I want to, I cannot express in polite language what I want to do to Vernon Desley. I am choosing to focus on the fact that you appear to have the situation more under control than I did at 6, or indeed at 21. Sirius Harry read this and then immediately wrote the critical lines onto a separate piece of paper in his own hand, added a summary of their significance, and sent it to Marchbanks and Ogilvy simultaneously with a note: he switched secret keepers. Sirius wasn't the secret keeper. Pettigrew was. Here is the written confirmation in his own words. Marchbanks' response was swift: this is the core of it. In a Veritaserum hearing this single-handedly exonerates him. Get me the original letter. I need it filed as evidence. Ogilvy's was shorter: the hearing petition goes in Monday. We have enough. The recusal motion landed in the Wisengamot registry on a Monday morning, filed by Gringotts Wizarding Bank as proxy for the House Potter hereditary seat, citing conflict of interest by the chief warlock in any matter pertaining to the guardianship or welfare of Harry James Potter. It was accompanied by a 20-page supporting brief that Ogilvy had written over the weekend and that cited 6 precedents: the Family and Magical Lineage Act 3 times, and the Banking Charter twice. Harry knew it had landed because he felt the particular tension of something in motion, not magically, but the way you felt weather changing before you could see it in the sky. It came through in Ragnarok's confirmation note, which was normally terse: filed and registered. Expect reaction within 24 hours. The reaction came in 18. It came not from the Wisengamot registry but from a small article in the Daily Prophet, which a goblin courier brought him along with the confirmation. Harry had requested all press coverage be forwarded, another thing the priority client card arranged. The article was 3 paragraphs, buried on page 7, under the headline, Gringotts files unprecedented motion against Dumbledore in a move described by legal observers as highly unusual. Gringotts Wizarding Bank has filed a formal recusal motion against Chief Warlock Albus Dumbledore in the Wisengamot, citing undisclosed conflict of interest relating to a minor ward. The motion is connected to an inheritance audit filed last month involving an unnamed minor of significant wizarding lineage. Chief Warlock Dumbledore declined to comment. Gringotts Director Ragnarok confirmed only that the bank was acting in its capacity as proxy representative for a hereditary seat and was fulfilling its obligations under the relevant acts. Harry read the article and thought, unnamed minor. 3 paragraphs and no name. He appreciated the restraint, though he suspected it wouldn't last. He was right. It didn't. The next day's Prophet had twice as much, and on page 2, Boy Who Lived Behind Gringotts Challenge. With a subheading that was a question and a body that was mostly speculation. By Wednesday it was front page, not his name, still unnamed, but the speculation had reached a volume that made the unnamed meaningless. Everybody who knew anything was connecting the dots. Harry read each one and made notes on what the coverage suggested about who was talking to the press and what they were trying to achieve. He sent his notes to Marchbanks, who wrote back, "Good analysis." The source on Thursday's article is a Wisengamot member. Dumbledore sighed. They're trying to make this look like a child being manipulated by Gringotts against a wise guardian. We will need to manage the narrative. Harry wrote back, "How?" "The hearing," she said. "When Black is exonerated, the narrative writes itself." On Thursday morning, Ogilvy's petition for a formal Wisengamot hearing into the illegal imprisonment of Sirius Orion Black went in. It cited 7 legal statutes, the expired emergency powers, the lack of trial record, and attached as supporting documentation a sealed but registered summary of new evidence including the Pettigrew financial records, the forensic reanalysis, and a written statement from the prisoner himself. It did not cite the Fidelius theory explicitly. That was for the hearing. By Thursday afternoon, the petition had been formally received and assigned a date, 3 weeks hence. A panel of 7 Wisengamot members would hear the case, chosen by rotation from the full membership, a process that, because of the recusal motion now in effect, excluded Dumbledore from any involvement in panel selection. The recusal had held. Harry got the news from Ogilvy via Goblin Courier at 4 o'clock, a single line, hearing date confirmed. The recusal was not challenged. Prepare. Harry sat on the kitchen step in the late afternoon sun and read the lines several times. Around him, Privet Drive went about its Thursday business, a neighbor walking a dog, 2 children on bicycles, a delivery van reversing too slowly into a driveway. The entirely ordinary world, going on exactly as it did every day. He folded the note. Put it away. Prepare. He'd been preparing since he was 6 years old in a cupboard reading a letter by torchlight, and before that, in ways he hadn't had words for, the careful attention to detail, the instinct for the structure underneath things, the particular quality of patience that was not passivity but the deliberate holding of energy until the moment it was useful. He'd been preparing and he hadn't known what for, and now he knew. He wrote to Sirius. 3 weeks. Hearing confirmed. Veritaserum, the full truth about the Fidelius, everything. Ogilvy is the best barrister we could find and Marchbanks is behind it and Bones is pushing from the DMLE. You need to be ready to speak. You've been holding on to your innocence for 5 years. In 3 weeks you can say it out loud to people who have to listen. I'll be there. He sent it. Sat for another moment. Then he went inside and started making dinner, because it was his turn and the potatoes wouldn't peel themselves. What Harry couldn't know from Privet Drive, was what was happening in Azkaban when his letters arrived. The Dementors were the constant. They moved through the corridors like weather, cold pressure that pushed down on whatever was human in you and tried to find the bottom of it. Most prisoners stopped fighting that within the first year. Some within weeks. They slumped against the walls of their cells and let the cold in and stopped being people, just bodies going through the biological motions. Sirius had not done that. It had been close, in the second year. Very close. There had been weeks where the memory he used to fight the cold, his animagus form, the knowledge that as a dog he felt them less, could slip through their attention, had barely been enough. Then the letters had started coming. He read them so many times the paper softened at the folds. He used them the way he'd used the memory of his animagus form, as something concrete and real to hold against the cold, something warm enough to push back with. A 6-year-old in Surrey who had been in a cupboard his whole life and had still found a way to do all of this. A child who wrote with Lily's clarity and James's absolute refusal to accept a situation that shouldn't be accepted. He lay on the cell floor at night with his eyes open in the dark and let himself imagine it clearly for the first time, walking out. Breathing outside air. Meeting Harry Potter face to face. 3 weeks. He could hold on for 3 weeks. He'd been holding on for 5 years on much less. Dumbledore's response to the hearing petition was silence, which was itself a kind of response. He did not challenge the recusal. He did not contest the petition. He made no public statement beyond the single, decline to comment, to the prophet. Marchbanks sent Harry a note about this, his silence is strategic. He is not fighting the hearing because he knows fighting it looks worse than the hearing itself. He is calculating that even if Black is exonerated, he can still manage the aftermath. Do not let that be true. Harry thought about this for several days. He thought about what managing the aftermath looked like from Dumbledore's position, a world where Sirius was exonerated but Dumbledore remained the center of authority, where Harry was grateful for the outcome but still somehow within Dumbledore's orbit. He thought about what prevented that. The answer was simple but it required Sirius to be ready. He wrote once more to Azkaban. Sirius. When this is over, I need you to petition immediately for activation of your guardianship rights from my parents' will. Don't wait. Don't let anything settle into a new arrangement before that's done. The hearing, then the petition, same day if possible. I don't want to give anyone time to manage the aftermath. Harry. The reply came 2 days before the hearing. Noted and understood. Ogilvy already has the petition drafted. I have signed it. I'm ready. Padfoot. Harry didn't know what Padfoot meant. He filed it away for later. He read the letter once more, put it in the jacket with the others, and thought about the fact that in 2 days he was going to see the inside of the Wizengamot chamber for the first time. He thought about what his mother had written. Then he went to sleep, because he needed to be sharp, and sharp required rest, and he had never let urgency talk him out of being practical. 3 feet wide. 6 feet long. His cupboard, his home for 6 years, his starting point. In 2 days he was going somewhere else. Chapter 5, Dumbledore moves. First, the morning of the hearing -4 days, Dumbledore came to Privet Drive. Harry knew he would. He'd known since Marchbanks warned him about the silence, that it wasn't acceptance, it was positioning. A man who had been managing outcomes for decades didn't simply stop because a legal process had been initiated. He looked for the spaces the legal process couldn't reach, and the space it couldn't reach was here, a house in Surrey, a 6-year-old boy, a conversation that happened before the lawyers arrived. Harry was in the back garden when the doorbell rang. He heard it from the garden, heard Petunia's footsteps in the kitchen, heard the pause that meant she'd looked through the frosted glass panel and recognized the visitor and was deciding what to do. The pause lasted about 4 seconds, which told Harry she was afraid of Dumbledore in a way that was different from how she was afraid of most things. Not because he was dangerous in the obvious way. Because he made you feel like everything he was saying was reasonable and that your own resistance was the unreasonable thing. He heard the door open. He put down his book, the Wizarding Law Guide, still going strong, currently at a chapter on hereditary voting rights, and walked around to the front of the house. Dumbledore was standing in the doorway. Harry had seen pictures of him. The chocolate frog cards, the newspaper photographs, the portraits in the books he'd found. But pictures didn't catch everything, and what they didn't catch was the quality of the man's presence, the way he occupied space, not loudly or aggressively but with the absolute settled certainty of something that had been standing in the same spot for a very long time and had never had reason to move. He was tall, with silver hair and a silver beard and half-moon spectacles that somehow managed to suggest both scholarly mildness and complete awareness of everything in the room. He was wearing deep blue robes that would have looked absurd on Privet Drive, except that on him they looked like the street was the thing that was out of place. He was looking at Petunia with an expression of warm, gentle apology. "Petunia," he said. "I am sorry to come unannounced. I wondered if Harry might be available for a brief conversation." Petunia's hands were doing the thing they did when she was nervous, small, tight movements against her apron, a kind of wringing she did without noticing it. She stopped because she'd seen Harry come around the corner of the house, and now Dumbledore had too, and both of them were looking at him. Harry looked back. This was the first time they'd seen each other. Harry understood, in the specific way he'd developed of understanding things quickly by their essential nature, that this moment was important not because of what was said in it but because of what was established. The first few seconds of this interaction were going to say something that neither of them could unsay. "Harry," Dumbledore said. His voice was warm in exactly the way Marchbanks had predicted, not performed warm but the real thing, which was more complicated to deal with. "It is very good to finally meet you. Professor Dumbledore," Harry said. He stopped a few feet from the door, hands easy at his sides. He didn't smile but he wasn't hostile. He was simply looking. "You should have gone through Mrs. Marchbanks." Something moved very briefly across Dumbledore's face. Adjustment. He absorbed it with the ease of a man who had absorbed unexpected things for a century and found a way to continue being warm through them. "Yes," he said. "You are right. I apologize for that." He paused. "I find myself in the unusual position of wanting to speak with you directly rather than through intermediaries. I hope you can understand the impulse." "I understand it," Harry said. "I'm still going to need to have Mrs. Marchbanks here for any substantive conversation." "Of course." Dumbledore looked at him steadily. "Would it be agreeable if I simply sat with you for a few minutes? No business. No legal matters. Just talking." Behind Dumbledore, Petunia had gone very still in the doorway. Harry glanced at her and she stepped back without a word, giving them the entrance hall. Harry thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. "In the garden," he said. "Not the house." Dumbledore inclined his head. They went around to the back garden, Harry leading, which he'd done deliberately, because leading meant setting the pace and the direction. He sat on the garden step. Dumbledore settled on the low garden wall with the ease of someone comfortable in all physical situations, robes arranging themselves without apparent effort. The garden was quiet in the way of mid-morning weekday suburbia. A wood pigeon was making its soft repetitive sound from the neighbor's tree. The Dursleys' garden was not interesting, square of lawn, square of concrete, a shed that was mostly a storage facility for Vernon's pretensions to handsomeness, but it was outside and private, which mattered. Dumbledore looked around it with the expression of someone who had seen many things and was capable of finding something worth attending to in all of them. "You are very like her," he said. "Your mother." Harry waited. "She had the same quality of," Dumbledore paused, apparently searching for the right word, which Harry suspected was a small performance, because a man who had used words for a century knew exactly which ones he wanted. "Precision," he settled on. Lily could look at a complicated situation and find its structure immediately. "See the bones of it. You have that." "Thank you," Harry said. He kept his voice neutral. He wasn't cold, he wasn't performing coldness any more than Dumbledore was performing warmth, he was just being careful. "I want to explain some things to you," Dumbledore said. "Not to change what you have done, I rather think the legal machinery is in motion and explanation wouldn't change it. But because I think you deserve to hear my reasoning." "All right," Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him with those blue eyes that were attentive and genuine in a way that Harry could feel, which was the thing Marchbanks had warned him about and which was exactly as difficult as she'd said. He was a man who paid real attention, and real attention was rare enough that it had a specific gravity. "When your parents died," Dumbledore began, "I was faced with a situation that had no good solutions. A child who needed protection. A world that was wounded and frightened and in which every magical family of standing would have been a potential target. I needed you safe. I needed you hidden. You put me in a cupboard," Harry said. "I placed you with the only blood protection available," Dumbledore said. "Your mother's sacrifice created a unique magical safeguard tied to her bloodline. Petunia Dursley, despite, a brief pause, her limitations as a guardian, was the only person in the world who could activate that protection simply by accepting you into her home." "And the money?" Harry asked. Dumbledore's expression was steady. "The funds I accessed from your vault were used, every penny, in service of combating the remnants of Voldemort's organization. The Phoenix Fund exists for that purpose. The fight did not end with his first defeat, his followers were still active, still dangerous." "Under your direction," Harry said. "Your decision about what was necessary." "Yes. Without telling me. Without asking me. You took money from an orphan baby's vault to fund a private organization you controlled." Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. The wood pigeon continued its sound from the neighbor's tree. "You were a baby," he said, with the tone of someone pointing out something obvious and self-evident. "I'm 6 now," Harry said. "You still didn't ask." Something shifted in Dumbledore's expression, very slight, the adjustment of a man who was recalibrating in real time. "You are right that I should have sought a more formal accounting arrangement," he said. "That was an oversight. The circumstances at the time were—" "I'm not arguing about the circumstances at the time," Harry said. "I'm saying that you made a decision that this was all yours to manage, and you never planned to stop managing it. The Phoenix Fund is still active. The withdrawals continued until Gringotts froze everything. That's not a wartime emergency. That's a habit." Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. The blue eyes behind the half-moon spectacles were genuinely thoughtful. Harry could tell the difference between performed thoughtfulness and the real thing by now, and this was the real thing. The man was actually thinking about what Harry had said. "Yes," Dumbledore said finally, quietly. "It is." The admission landed between them. Harry hadn't expected it and he held himself very still so as not to show that. He filed it carefully. This was the thing Marchbanks had warned him was more dangerous than the charm. The moment of apparent honesty. The thing that made you want to trust. What you're doing, Harry said, keeping his voice even, right now, coming here, talking to me like this, it's the same thing. You're trying to manage this too. Dumbledore's expression didn't close. It remained open, which was somehow more disarming than anything else could have been. You are perceptive, he said. And you are not wrong. But I would say this, one can have mixed motives and still mean what one says. I am here to manage a situation, yes. I am also genuinely interested in you as a person. These are not mutually exclusive. No, Harry said. But when someone has been managing your life without asking you, it's hard to know which one you're getting. Dumbledore looked at him for a long time. The garden was quiet. Somewhere in the house Petunia was almost certainly pressed against the back wall of the kitchen listening through the door, but Harry had already accounted for that and wasn't saying anything she couldn't hear. What is it that you want? Dumbledore asked. Not through lawyers. Not through Gringotts. What do you, Harry Potter, actually want? Harry thought about whether to answer that and decided yes, because the answer was both honest and unhelpful to Dumbledore's position. I want the money that was stolen from my family back. I want the people my parents chose to look after me to actually be allowed to do that. I want to live somewhere that isn't a cupboard. He paused. And I want to make my own choices. About who I trust. About what I do with what's mine. About what I'm for. That last part, Dumbledore said softly. What you're for. Yes, Harry said. I would not presume to tell you what you are for, Dumbledore said, and Harry watched the sentence come out and watched the careful shape of it, not a lie, not exactly, but a statement designed to exist in the space where a promise would be. You already have, Harry said. You decided what I was for before I could walk. You arranged everything around it. You put me somewhere that would make me, he stopped, because he didn't have the full word yet, but he found the outside of it, small. You needed me to be small enough to fit into the shape you'd made. The silence that followed was the longest one. Dumbledore looked at the garden wall. Then at the sky above the neighbor's tree. Then at Harry. And what was on his face was not the warm calculation or the careful management or even the genuine thoughtfulness of before. It was something older and more uncomfortable, the expression of a person looking at something true that they had been not looking at for a very long time. I am sorry, he said. For the cupboard. I did not know it was a cupboard. Would it have changed anything? Harry asked. Another long pause. I would like to tell you yes. But you don't know. No, Dumbledore said quietly. I don't know. Harry sat with that. It was an honest thing and he recognized it as such. It didn't change what had been done. It didn't even particularly move him, because honesty too late was a specific and limited kind of honesty. But he registered it. The hearing is in 4 days, Harry said. Whatever you're thinking about doing between now and then, don't. Dumbledore looked at him. I'm not threatening you, Harry said. I'm telling you that anything you do to interfere makes everything worse. For Sirius and for you. He met the blue eyes steadily. You let an innocent man rot in prison for 5 years. You can't fix that. But you cannot make it worse in the next 4 days. Something passed across Dumbledore's face. It wasn't pleasant to witness. You know about Sirius. I know everything you should have told me, Harry said. I found it myself. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. He was dangerous, he said. I believed, at the time, I genuinely believed, you believed what was convenient, Harry said, and it came out without heat, just clean and clear. Sirius in Azkaban meant you were my guardian. Sirius free meant you weren't. That is not why, I'm not saying that's why you believed it. I'm saying it's why you didn't look more carefully. Harry stood. The conversation had done what it needed to do. Please go through Mrs. Marchbanks for anything else. Dumbledore stood too, slowly, with the weight of a man carrying something that had gotten heavier during the conversation than when he'd arrived. He looked at Harry, really looked, in the way that was genuine and attentive, and there was something in it that wasn't management and wasn't charm and wasn't strategy. Just a very old man looking at a 6-year-old and finding himself, perhaps for the first time, genuinely uncertain. "You are remarkable," he said quietly. "I'm 6, Harry said. "Please don't use that as a reason to manage me." He walked back into the house through the kitchen door, past Petunia who was standing at the counter not quite pretending to make tea. He didn't look at her. He went to his cupboard, sat on the bed, and processed the conversation methodically, running back through it section by section the way he ran back through important things, checking for the places where he might have given too much or where Dumbledore might have gotten something useful. He didn't think he'd done too badly. He wrote to Marchbanks immediately. He came. We spoke in the garden. I told him to go through you for anything else. He admitted he didn't know about the cupboard and that he wasn't sure it would have changed anything. He said he was sorry. I believe he means the sorry, but I don't think it changes his plans. He'll try something else before the hearing. Marchbanks' response came within the hour. What else? Think carefully. He has 4 days and he knows the legal position is bad. What does he have that isn't legal? Harry thought about it. Wrote back, information. He knows things about my parents, about the war, about Voldemort that I don't know. He might try to use that. Make me feel like I need him to understand my own life. Marchbanks, yes. Don't let him. You will learn those things in time and on your terms. Anything he tells you now is shaped to produce a specific response. Harry, I know. I'm not going to him for it. A pause. Then, good. One more thing. The press. 3 reporters have contacted my office asking for comment. I've said nothing. But the story is going to be fully out before the hearing. Are you ready for that? Harry sat with the question. The idea of his name in the paper, his story, the cupboard, the audit, all of it, being readable by every person in the wizarding world. He thought about how that felt and was honest with himself about it. It felt exposed. He didn't love exposed. But he thought about what the alternative was, and the alternative was Dumbledore's version of events getting out first. He wrote back, yes. If it comes out, let it come from our side first. Can we choose who to speak to? I know exactly who, Marchbanks replied, and Harry could feel the satisfaction in it through the parchment. The interview was not what Harry had pictured. He'd pictured a reporter, his vague idea of one, assembled from Muggle television and the copies of the Prophet he'd been sent. Someone with a notepad and a camera and the particular energy of a person trying to get information quickly. What arrived on Saturday morning, again through the front door, was a woman in her early 40s who moved with the careful deliberateness of someone who'd been doing this long enough to know that speed was often the enemy of truth. Rita Skeeter's name Harry did not know. The name Marchbanks had chosen was Harriet Blum, senior correspondent for the Wizarding World Review, a publication Harry had not heard of because it was not the Prophet. Marchbanks had explained, in a note, the Prophet is too connected to the Ministry and currently too susceptible to Dumbledore's influence. Blum is independent, rigorous, and has a personal and professional dislike of institutional dishonesty. She will print what you say without editorializing it into something else. Harriet Blum was sharp-faced and quiet-footed, with ink stains on her right hand that she didn't try to hide. She came in, declined tea from Petunia with a single polite word, sat across from Harry in the living room with a notepad and a quill that moved on its own, and looked at him with the frank assessment of someone who evaluated truthfulness for a living. I want to be clear about what I'm writing, she said. This is a profile of your situation, the audit, the legal actions, the hearing. It's not a puff piece and it's not a hit piece. I'm interested in what happened and what it means. All right, Harry said. You're 6. Yes. How did you get to Gringotts? Commuter train from Little Whinging to London. Then walked to Charing Cross Road. The barman at the Leaky Cauldron showed me the way to the alley. Blum wrote something. And the wall? Tom said you opened it yourself. Yes. You didn't have a wand? No. Just magic. Yes. She looked at him for a moment. Her quill moved. Tell me about the letter. The notification. Harry told her. He didn't editorialize and he didn't perform emotion. He told her about finding it in Petunia's drawer, about reading it by torchlight, about the phrase third attempt and what it had meant. He told her about the audit and about Ragnarok and about the numbers. He told her about the emancipation and about the freeze. He told her everything that was a matter of record, and he told it with the clear, sequential precision of someone who understood that facts didn't need decoration to be powerful. Blum wrote through all of it. She asked follow-up questions that were specific and good, she caught the implications, understood the legal structures, didn't need things explained twice. At no point did she look at him with the expression people often used with him, the one that was pity dressed as warmth. She looked at him like someone she was talking to, which he appreciated. Sirius Black, she said. Yes. You initiated the review of his case. I found the discrepancy in the will. He should have been my guardian. The circumstances that prevented that seemed important to understand. He paused. He was imprisoned without trial. That's not a complicated legal opinion, there's just no trial record. The hearing is in 3 days. Yes. Blum looked at her notes. Looked up. One question that isn't strictly factual. What do you want people to understand about this? Harry thought about it carefully. That none of this should have required a 6-year-old, he said. The letters came to me 3 times and were intercepted 3 times. If I'd never found that envelope, this would still be happening. Someone would still be taking from my vaults and keeping me in a cupboard and telling themselves it was for my own good. He paused. There were adults in the wizarding world who knew things weren't right. The goblins knew. Someone at the ministry probably knew. Nobody acted. I'm not remarkable for finding out. I'm just the only one who had the right combination of having nothing to lose and something to find. Blum looked at him for a moment after he stopped speaking. Her quill had stilled. That, she said, with a precision that matched his, is going in the piece exactly as you said it. The article ran in the Wizarding World Review Sunday morning, the day before the hearing. Harry read it at the kitchen table while Petunia made breakfast with the focused silence of someone working very hard to act normal. The article was 4 pages, 4 pages of the review, which ran broadsheet size, so more words than Harry could immediately count. Blum had done what she promised. The facts in their correct order. The legal actions and their significance. The audit numbers. The hearing upcoming. And near the end, a section titled in his own words that was 4 paragraphs of Harry's direct quotes. And the last paragraph, which was Bloom's and which Harry read twice, Harry Potter is 6 years old. He has the careful syntax of someone who has been reading seriously for much longer than his age should allow, and the stillness of someone who has learned to exist in environments that did not accommodate him. When he speaks about what he found in those ledgers, the money taken, the letters blocked, the man who should have been his family locked away without trial, he does not speak with the bitter fire you might expect. He speaks with the particular quality of someone who has decided that the facts are sufficient and that adding emotion to them would only make them easier to dismiss. He is, in the most precise sense of the word, serious. Whichever direction the hearing goes this Monday, that seriousness will not stop. Harry Potter has not been performing capability in the absence of guidance. He has been exercising it. Harry folded the paper. Petunia set a plate in front of him, eggs and toast, a real breakfast, better than he usually got. She didn't say anything. She hadn't said anything directly to him since the Friday conversation in the living room. But she put the breakfast down and she stood at the counter and she didn't leave the room, which was its own kind of communication. He ate the breakfast. It was good. She was my sister, Petunia said, after a while. Not to anything he'd said, to the room. To the paper on the table, maybe. Harry waited. She was my sister and I was angry at her, and then she was dead and I couldn't. Petunia stopped. Her hands were on the counter, very still. I took the money because I was angry. I told myself it was compensation. For the inconvenience. She stopped again. I knew what a cupboard was. Harry looked at the eggs on his plate. I know that doesn't, Petunia said. I know it doesn't fix anything. No, Harry said. It doesn't. Petunia nodded once, very slightly. She went back to the sink. The morning continued. Harry didn't offer forgiveness, because she hadn't asked for it. He didn't condemn her, because condemnation was expensive and he had other things to spend his energy on. He sat with the knowledge of what she'd said and noted that it was more than he'd expected, and that was something. He put his dishes in the sink, got his jacket with all its papers, and went to his cupboard to prepare for Monday. Dumbledore's second move came Sunday evening. Not a visit this time. A letter, through ordinary owl, which was itself a message, because using ordinary post when you knew Goblin Courier was available was a choice about formality and precedent. It arrived with a school owl, tawny and serious, and landed on the windowsill of Harry's cupboard through some owl navigation that Harry hadn't worked out yet and didn't particularly question. The letter was short. 2 paragraphs. Harry read it standing up. Harry, I have thought a great deal about our conversation. I have also read what you said to Ms. Blum, which I found, honest in ways I found difficult to read, and deserved in ways that were more difficult still. I will not interfere with the hearing tomorrow. I want you to know that this is not a negotiation and not a conditional promise. Whatever the outcome, I will not use the Wizarding chair to influence it. I recused myself before the recusal motion was filed. I want that to be clear, though I understand if you don't believe it. What I want to say, and what I could not say in the garden with the right words, is this: your parents were 2 of the finest people I have ever known, and what happened to them, what was done to you as a consequence, was not part of any plan I could have lived with if I had seen it fully. I did not see it fully because I chose not to. That is the most honest thing I know how to say. I hope the hearing goes well. Albus Dumbledore. Harry read it twice. He sat with it for a long time, longer than he'd sat with most things. He thought about what Marchbanks had said, that the honest version was more dangerous than the manipulative one. He thought about whether this was the honest version or the version that performed honesty so well it was indistinguishable. He thought about the line, I chose not to. 3 words. The most expensive words in the letter. The words that cost something to write, if they were true. He wrote back. Not a long response. 1 paragraph. Professor Dumbledore, I believe you mean what you say in this letter. I also think meaning something and understanding it fully are different things, and that what you chose not to see is going to take you a long time to see clearly. I hope you use that time well. Harry Potter. He sealed it and sent it. Then he lay down on the narrow bed in the cupboard that was 3 feet wide and 6 feet long and closed his eyes. Tomorrow was Monday. Tomorrow was the hearing. Tomorrow, one way or another, something was going to end or begin or both, and Harry had done everything he could do to make sure it went the right way. He had Marchbanks and Ogilvy and Bones and Ragnock and the audit documents and the will and Sirius's written testimony and Pettigrew's financial records and the forensic summary and 1 article in the Wizarding World Review that was probably being read right now by every person in the Wizarding world who'd gotten up early. He'd started with £4.37 and a letter from a kitchen drawer. He was ready. The wood pigeon in the neighbor's tree had gone quiet. The house breathed the deep even breath of sleep. Harry lay still, eyes closed, hands flat at his sides, and thought about his mother's note until he wasn't thinking about anything at all and sleep took him cleanly, like a hand closing over a light. Chapter 6, The Wizengamot. Hearing. The Ministry of Magic was underground. Harry had known this from the law guide and the documents he'd studied, but knowing a thing and standing inside it were different experiences, and he gave himself exactly 10 seconds to take it in when they arrived through the visitor's entrance, an old telephone box on a side street that Marchbanks had guided him to with the brisk efficiency of someone who had done this many times and found the novelty long since exhausted. The descending floor, the echoing atrium with its gilded ceiling and the fountain at its center, a statue he looked at once, filed, and moved past because it told him things about how the wizarding world saw itself that were worth knowing but not worth stopping for. It was 6:45 in the morning. The hearing was at 9. Marchbanks had insisted on early. Get there before the crowd, she'd said, before the press stations outside, before the Wisengamot members who would want to observe the arriving parties and form impressions. Harry had understood the logic immediately and agreed. Ogilvy met them at the atrium fountain, briefcase in hand, looking like a man who had slept 4 hours and considered that adequate. The panel is confirmed, he said, falling into step beside them as they crossed toward the lifts. 7 members. 3 I'd call sympathetic, 2 neutral, 2 uncomfortable. Madame Longbottom is on the panel, which is good. She's rigorous and she has no tolerance for procedural shortcutting. Tiberius Ogden is the second good one, old school but fair. Dolores Umbridge is the uncomfortable one. Uncomfortable how? Harry asked. Ministry loyalist. She'll look for reasons to complicate. Ogilvy's mouth pressed together briefly. She's not unintelligent. Just motivated by the wrong things. Can she derail it? She can try to slow it. She can't overturn a Veritaserum result. He looked at Harry. You're prepared for the possibility that Dumbledore shows up to observe? He wrote to me yesterday, Harry said. He said he wouldn't interfere. Ogilvy and Marchbanks exchanged a look over Harry's head. We'll see, Marchbanks said. The lift took them down. Deeper than Harry expected, the numbers on the brass dial descending past floors that had names suggesting increasingly specific purposes, misuse of Muggle artifacts, improper use of magic, magical catastrophes, until it stopped at the lowest level and opened into a corridor that was different from the floors above. Cooler. The ceiling lower. The lighting older, torches rather than the enchanted lights of the upper floors, and the stone walls close enough on both sides that there was no ambiguity about what this part of the building had originally been designed for. Courtrooms, Marchbanks said. They're old. They kept them as they are deliberately. The history is meant to be felt. They passed 3 numbered doors before reaching courtroom 10, which was the largest and which already had 2 ministry officials standing outside it doing the important-looking busy that Harry recognized as waiting while pretending not to. They straightened slightly when Marchbanks appeared, and one of them, a young man with the expression of someone who had been briefed extensively about this morning, opened the door. The courtroom was a stone chamber, round, with tiered bench seating rising on 3 sides like an amphitheater and a central floor space with a single chair at its center that Harry looked at and looked away from, because it had chains on the arms, old iron chains worn smooth with use, and the sight of them sat in his stomach wrong. The raised platform at the front, behind what Harry thought of as the judge's bench, though it was really a full half-circle of 7 seats, was empty. The gallery tiers were empty. The room smelled of stone and time and the particular quality of a space that had been used for serious things for centuries. Marchbanks surveyed it and turned to Harry. You will not sit in that chair, she said, nodding at the central seat with the chains. That chair is for accused parties in criminal proceedings. We are here as petitioning parties, which means you and I sit at the petitioner's table here. She indicated a long table to the left of the central floor, and Ogilvy manages the presentation. Sirius will be brought up from the ministry holding area at 9. He'll be placed in the central chair initially, as standard protocol for a prisoner hearing, but we move to remove that designation within the first 10 minutes. The chains, Harry said. Will release when the panel orders them released. Which they will do when we've established grounds. She looked at him. It will be brief. Try not to visibly react. Harry nodded. One more thing. Marchbanks sat down at the petitioner's table and set her briefcase on it with the deliberate placement of someone organizing a field of operations. Sirius has been in Azkaban for nearly 5 years. He will look significantly different from any image you might have of him. He will also be recovering his bearings. In public, in a crowd, after that length of time in that place. He will need to not be worried about you, so you need to be steady. I'll be steady, Harry said. She looked at him with those clear grey eyes. Yes, she said. I expect you will. People arrived between 7 and 9 in stages that told their own story. Amelia Bones came first, at 7:15, moving through the courtroom door with the purposeful efficiency of someone who owned the room by professional right. She was a compact woman in her mid-40s with square spectacles and brown hair streaked through with early gray, and she moved with the particular quality of someone who had spent 2 decades making hard things happen in rooms that resisted them. She stopped at the petitioner's table, looked at Harry with a directness that was matched only by Ragnarok's in Harry's experience, and extended her hand. Harry Potter, she said. Director Bones, Harry said, and shook it. Her grip was firm. She held his hand for a moment longer than a formal handshake required, looking at him with something that was professional assessment and something else underneath it that she kept contained. Then she nodded once, like something had been confirmed, and took her own seat at a table to the right that had the ministry crest on it. She opened her briefcase and got to work without further ceremony. The Wisingamot panel arrived at 8:30, filing in through a door behind the raised platform in their plum-colored robes, taking seats with varying degrees of the expectant tension that big hearings produced. Harry watched them. Marchbanks had described the 7. He matched descriptions to faces. Augusta Longbottom he found immediately, a formidable woman in her late 50s with the bearing of someone who had decided decades ago that she was not going to be impressed by things people thought should impress her, and who had maintained this position with complete consistency. She surveyed the courtroom with the proprietary attention of a senior judge, exchanged a word with the man to her left, and settled. Tiberius Ogden was older, with the comfortable solidity of a man who had been on this panel long enough to trust his own judgment. He looked at the petitioner's table, caught Harry's eye for a moment, and looked away without expression, which was not unfriendly. Dolores Umbridge, at the far end of the panel bench, was a small woman who looked like she'd been designed to suggest harmlessness, soft round face, pink cardigan beneath the plum robes, hair that sat in careful curls, and who managed to be the most obviously calculating presence in the room. She was making notes on a pad with a quill that moved with the precise enthusiasm of someone who was building a case about something and finding the material useful. She had not looked at Harry yet, but Harry had been watching her peripheral attention and she had been watching him since she sat down. He noted her and moved on. The gallery filled slowly, ministry officials, a handful of press who had been admitted by press pass, several witches and wizards who had the air of interested legal observers. At 8:55, a woman Harry recognized from the Wizarding World Review byline photo took a seat in the press gallery with a quill and a notepad and the composed alertness of someone who had already written most of the story in her head and was here to fill in the details. Harriet Blum looked at Harry and gave him a single brief nod. At 8:58, the door opened one more time. Albus Dumbledore came in quietly. Not dramatically, if anything, pointedly undramatically, choosing a seat in the gallery rather than the front, robes a plain deep grey rather than the blue Harry had seen on Privet Drive. He sat down, folded his hands, and looked at the empty central chair with an expression that was composed and told Harry very little. His eyes moved once to the petitioner's table and found Harry and held for a moment before moving back. Harry looked back, steady. Turned to the table. At 9 o'clock exactly, Augusta Longbottom said, "Bring in the prisoner," and everything that had been building for weeks came to a single still point. Sirius Black came through the side door flanked by 2 Aurors. Harry had prepared for this. Marchbanks had told him, and he'd done his best to build a picture in advance so the actual sight wouldn't take him entirely off guard. He'd done reasonably well at the preparation. He was less successful at the impact. Sirius was 31 years old and looked simultaneously older and younger than that, older in the sense that Azkaban had hollowed things out of him, left his face sharp where it should have been rounded, his eyes set deeper than they should be. Younger in the sense that underneath all of it, in the bones of his face and the way he held his shoulders even now, even in ministry robes that were too big for what he currently weighed, there was something that hadn't been extinguished. A stubborn residual vitality. The quality of someone who had decided not to die in there and had meant it. He was brought to the central chair. He sat. The chains moved automatically, closing around his wrists, and his jaw tightened but nothing else moved. His eyes, moving across the room, found Harry at the petitioner's table. They looked at each other. Harry had been managing the steadiness Marchbanks had asked for since 7 o'clock and he kept managing it, but there was something in his chest that was not manageable exactly, just there, burning clean and purposeful. He looked at Sirius and Sirius looked at him and several years of letters and plans and logistics collapsed into this single moment that had nothing logical in it, just the simple impossible fact of a person who was supposed to have been his family and who was here, present, alive. He gave Sirius one nod. Short, certain. "I've got you." Sirius blinked, once, long and slow. Something in his face went from braced to something he'd probably forgotten he was capable of. Then Augusta Longbottom said, "We will call the hearing to order," and it became a legal proceeding. Ogilvy was extraordinary at his job. Harry watched him work through the first 40 minutes of the hearing with the appreciation of someone who understood craft when they saw it. He was not flashy. He didn't need to be. He had the file, and the file was built so well that his job was primarily to present it in the right order and let it produce its own conclusions in the minds of 7 people who were paid to read evidence clearly. He opened with the procedural case, the emergency powers, their expiration date, the legal threshold they'd been applied under, and the fact that by any statutory measure the detention had become illegal in early 1983. He put the arrest record next to the statute. He said, simply, "There is no legal authority for this imprisonment as of March 1983. We are here today, 2 years later, because no one has addressed that." He did not editorialize. He let Augusta Longbottom's face do the rest of that work. She was formidable. She asked 3 precise questions in the first 20 minutes that demonstrated she had read the filing in full and had gone looking for its weak points and had found, apparently, that the procedural case was sound. Tiberius Ogden asked 2 questions that were substantive about the wartime period and received answers that satisfied him visibly. Dolores Umbridge asked 4 questions that were designed to delay by requiring technical clarifications, and Ogilvy answered all 4 with the patient precision of a man who had anticipated them. At the 40-minute mark, Ogilvy said, "We now come to the substantive question, which is not only whether Mr. Black's imprisonment was legal, but whether the original grounds for arrest were valid. The Wisengamot has a responsibility to address both." Umbridge made a sound that was not quite an objection but occupied the same space as one. "The grounds for arrest are a separate matter from the legality of the detention. They are not separate when the grounds for arrest, properly examined, reveal an entirely different picture of events," Ogilvy said, with the calm of someone who had been expecting this specific attempted turn. "The panel is here to determine whether this man was wrongly imprisoned. That requires examining all of it." Augusta Longbottom said, "Continue, Mr. Ogilvy." Umbridge sat back with an expression like a smile that had been stopped just before completion. Ogilvy put the Pettigrew file on the table. He walked through it methodically. The informant payments, the October 29 date, the forensic analysis of the explosion, the blast directionality. He was careful and precise and he gave the panel time to read each document before he spoke to it. Augusta Longbottom turned pages with her jaw set. Tiberius Ogden's pen had been moving steadily and stopped entirely about halfway through the Pettigrew section. "The fundamental question," Ogilvy said, when they'd reached the end of the documentary evidence, "is who was the secret keeper for the Fidelius charm protecting James and Lily Potter." He paused. "We have a written statement from the defendant on this point. We also have a request that the defendant be permitted to give that same evidence under veritaserum, which he has voluntarily agreed to." Umbridge, "Voluntary veritaserum is highly irregular. Voluntary veritaserum is specifically provided for under the Evidence Standards Act of 1967, Amelia Bones said from the ministry table, without looking up from her own documents. Her voice had the quality of a fact being placed on a table with enough weight that it wasn't going anywhere. Umbridge closed her mouth. Augusta Longbottom looked at Sirius. Mr. Black. You understand what voluntary veritaserum means and you consent to this. Sirius had been sitting in the chains through 40 minutes of procedural and documentary argument with the stillness of someone who had trained himself to exist in difficult conditions. His eyes were clear. His voice, when he spoke for the first time, was rougher than it should have been, 5 years of disuse and Azkaban cold, but it was steady. I do, he said. I've been wanting to say this for 5 years. I'll say it however the panel needs. Augusta Longbottom looked along the panel bench. 3 nods. Ogden. Longbottom herself. A third panel member, a witch with iron-grey hair whose name Harry hadn't caught, who had been silent through the proceedings but whose attention had been total. Umbridge didn't nod. The 2 uncomfortable members looked at each other. Neither actively objected. Administer the veritaserum, Augusta Longbottom said. The ministry's official veritaserum was administered by a trained potions officer who came in through the side door, 3 drops from a small vial into a glass of water that Sirius drank without hesitation. The process took 4 minutes. When Sirius's eyes went glassy clear, the officer confirmed the potion's effect and stepped back. Ogilvy stood. Mr. Black, he said. Were you the secret keeper for the Fidelius charm protecting James and Lily Potter? No. The word came without effort, without performance, clean as water. We switched. 3 days before Halloween. James and I decided Peter should be secret keeper instead. We thought it was clever misdirection. Everyone was watching me. The courtroom was very quiet. Was Peter Pettigrew the secret keeper? Yes. Is it possible, under the terms of a Fidelius charm, for anyone other than the secret keeper to reveal the protected secret? No. Is it therefore possible that you betrayed James and Lily Potter's location to Voldemort? No. It was impossible. I couldn't have done it even if I'd wanted to. The charm doesn't work that way. Ogilvy let that settle for a moment. The room was perfectly still. Did you kill Peter Pettigrew and those 12 muggles? No. Peter staged it. He blew up the street himself and cut off his own finger and ran. I was standing in the explosion because I'd gone to find him. I knew it had to be him, the only person who could have told Voldemort. I wasn't cursing him. I was. Sirius's voice caught on something under the veritaserum, the potion unable to suppress the weight of it entirely. I was asking him why. Silence. Have you ever, at any point, deliberately and of your own free will, acted against the welfare of James Potter, Lily Potter, or their son Harry Potter? Never, Sirius said. They were my family. They were everything I had that was real. Ogilvy sat down. Augusta Longbottom said, Does the ministry wish to cross-examine? Amelia Bones stood. The ministry does not wish to cross-examine, Madam Chair. We consider the evidence presented today conclusive. We withdraw any claim to the legal validity of this detention. Umbridge stood immediately. Director Bones, this is not a determination you can make unilaterally. I am the director of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, Bones said, with the tone of someone identifying a fact rather than asserting an opinion. The legal determination of the validity of a ministry arrest is exactly a determination I can make. I am making it. She looked at the panel. The ministry's position is that Sirius Black was wrongfully arrested and illegally detained. We support full exoneration and immediate release. Umbridge sat down with the energy of someone who had more to say and had been prevented from saying it, and who was making a very detailed mental note about it. Augusta Longbottom looked along the panel for a long moment. The panel will confer. They conferred for 7 minutes. Harry watched. Marchbanks sat beside him with the composed patience of someone who had been through enough difficult hearings to know that 7 minutes was fast. Sirius sat in the central chair, veritaserum still in effect, eyes clear and distant, looking at nothing in particular with the expression of someone who was somewhere they couldn't quite believe. Harry watched Dumbledore in the gallery. Dumbledore had not moved through the entire proceeding. He sat with his hands folded in his lap and his eyes on the central floor, on Sirius, with an expression that Harry studied carefully. It was not the calculating look. It was not management or positioning. It was the expression of someone watching a consequence arrive that they had spent years not examining closely and were now examining with the full clarity of unavoidable present tense. He looked like someone who was finally seeing something he should have looked at a long time ago. Augusta Longbottom turned back to the room. The panel finds, unanimously, that the detention of Sirius Orion Black was conducted without legal authority as of March 1983 and should be classified as illegal imprisonment from that date. The panel further finds, on the basis of Veritaserum testimony and documentary evidence, that the original grounds for arrest were not established under any acceptable standard of evidence and that no reliable evidence exists supporting the charges on which the arrest was made. She paused. The panel orders the immediate and unconditional release of Sirius Orion Black, the formal expungement of any conviction or charge from ministry records, and the opening of an inquiry into the circumstances of the original arrest and the failure to conduct a trial. The chains on the chair released. They didn't do it dramatically. They simply opened, swinging back against the chair arms with a dull metallic sound that was the most ordinary thing Harry had ever heard and the most significant. Sirius looked down at his wrists. Looked up. His eyes moved across the room and found Harry and stayed there, and Harry let them, didn't look away, held steady because he'd promised steady. But something in him cracked, just slightly, clean through the managed composure that had been in place since 6:45 this morning, a single fracture in the control that he'd been holding since the cupboard, since the letters, since the night he'd found the envelope in Petunia's kitchen drawer, and he felt it go and let it go, because some things deserved to be felt. He was 6 years old and he had just watched his godfather's chains come off. He stood up from the petitioner's table, and crossed the floor, and stopped in front of Sirius Black's chair, and looked up at him, and said nothing, because there was nothing that needed to be said right now. Sirius looked down at him with 5 years of Azkaban in his face and the stubborn residual vitality still burning underneath it all, and the particular complex expression of a person seeing something they had been afraid would never happen. He reached out one of his newly freed hands and placed it very carefully on top of Harry's head, not messing the hair, not the kind of ruffling that adults did to children to assert a kind of comfortable affection. Just placing it there. Still. Present. "Hey, kid," he said. "Hey," Harry said. Behind them, Augusta Longbottom had resumed speaking about the formal procedural steps. Ogilvy was already writing. Amelia Bones was exchanging words with a ministry official that had the purposeful energy of someone who was about to set several things in motion. Harriet Blum in the gallery was writing fast enough that the quill was barely keeping up. Dumbledore, in the gallery, looked at his hands. The petition for guardianship activation came immediately after the formal exoneration, exactly as Harry had planned it. Ogilvy filed it before they left the courtroom, stamped and witnessed, with Sirius's signature and Harry's signature and Marchbank's co-signature as Harry's current legal representative. The petition cited the will, the exoneration, the biological relationship, and the pre-existing designation under the Family and Magical Lineage Act. It went into the system at 10:43. By 11, while they were still in the ministry building in a side room that Bones had organized, drinking tea that nobody particularly wanted but that occupied the hands usefully, the petition had been actioned. Provisional guardianship was granted pending a full welfare review that was standard but that Marchbank said would take approximately 2 weeks and was largely procedural given the circumstances. Sirius was reading the notification with the look of a man who had been told something extraordinary and was going through the process of integrating it. "Where have you been living?" he asked Harry. "Cupboard under the stairs," Harry said. "You're not going back to that cupboard," Sirius said. "I know," Harry said. "You're going to stay with me. As soon as I have a place that," he stopped. He was aware, apparently with some degree of discomfort, that he did not currently have a place. He had been in Azkaban for 5 years. He had, in the technical sense, nothing. He looked at Harry with the expression of someone realizing the gap between the thing they wanted to do and the means currently available to do it. Gringotts has been managing the estate, Harry said. My vaults. I also found out that the Potter family has a property. Potter Manor. I haven't been there yet. Sirius stared at him. It's been sitting empty, Harry said. I thought maybe we could go there. Together. He paused. There's also the matter of your own family estate, the Black family properties. Gringotts says they've been in a kind of legal holding since your imprisonment. With the exoneration, they should revert to you. Sirius looked at Marchbanks, who nodded confirmation. How do you know about the Black family estates? Sirius asked. I read a lot, Harry said. Sirius made a sound that was not quite a laugh but was the beginning of learning how to make one again. He looked at Harry for a long moment with something that was complicated and warm and deeply unsettled in the way of someone who had been alone for 5 years and was recalibrating very rapidly. He reached out and pushed the piece of Harry's fringe that always fell over the scar back up off his forehead, and looked at the scar, and then at Harry's eyes, and the combination of things in his face was too many to catalogue. James would have been, he started. I know, Harry said. Your mother would have had opinions about all of this. Probably, Harry said. I think she'd mostly agree with the direction. Sirius smiled. It was the real kind, and it reorganized his whole face, and through all the damage Azkaban had done to the surface of him, the person underneath it was suddenly completely visible, young and sharp and full of something that hadn't been extinguished. Yeah, he said. She would have. Dumbledore appeared in the doorway of the side room at 11:20. He didn't come in. He stood in the doorway and knocked on the open door, which was a specific kind of deference that Harry noted. Everyone in the room looked at him. Sirius went very still in the way of someone who was containing a response that had 5 years of accumulated pressure behind it. I won't interrupt, Dumbledore said. I only wanted to say, Sirius. I am sorry. What I believed about you was wrong, and the consequences of that belief were, he stopped. They were not just. I am sorry. Sirius looked at him for a long time. Harry watched Sirius's face and watched the processing happen, the anger, which was real and earned and enormous, going through something more complicated on its way to the surface. Not forgiveness. Something more honest than that, which was the admission that forgiveness was too large a thing to be accomplished in 30 seconds in a ministry corridor. I'm not going to tell you it's fine, Sirius said. Because it isn't. No, Dumbledore agreed. It isn't. But I don't want to spend the next 5 years on it either, Sirius said. I've spent enough years on enough things. He glanced at Harry briefly. I have better things to spend them on. Dumbledore looked at Harry then. Harry looked back. I read your letter, Dumbledore said. What you wrote Sunday evening. He paused. You said you believed I meant what I said in mine. And that meaning something and understanding it fully were different things. Yes, Harry said. You were right. He held Harry's gaze. I mean what I say. And I have a great deal left to understand. I intend to try. I know, Harry said. That's not forgiveness, Dumbledore said. No, Harry said. It's acknowledgement. You can earn the other one. Something moved across Dumbledore's face. He looked older in this moment than he had on Privet Drive, not physically but in some other sense, like the weight he was carrying had finally been quantified and he'd found it heavier than he'd estimated. He inclined his head, to Harry and to the room, and stepped back from the doorway. They heard his footsteps moving away down the corridor. The room was quiet for a moment. He really does think he was doing the right thing, Sirius said. Yes, Harry said. That's the part that's hardest to know what to do with. I know, Harry said. I've been thinking about it since I read his first letter. Someone being wrong about something they genuinely believe doesn't make the wrong thing smaller. It just means the solution has to be different. Sirius looked at him for a long moment. James was like that, he said. When he was thinking through a problem he'd get very still and then he'd say the thing that was exactly right and make it sound like he'd just noticed it. He watched Harry. You do the same thing. Harry didn't know what to say to that, which was unusual enough that he simply let it sit and felt the warmth of it. What happens next? Sirius asked. Marchbanks, who had been sitting to the side through this exchange with the disciplined patience of someone giving a room what it needed, opened her briefcase. The welfare review, which is procedural. The restitution proceedings, which will begin in the Wizengamot once we have the formal audit judgment entered, the money coming back to Harry's vaults. She looked at them both. And the question of the Black family properties and the Potter estate. Potter Manor, Harry said. It's been empty for 6 years, Marchbanks said. It will need attention. But it's structurally sound. Gringotts has been maintaining the basic magical protections as part of the estate management. Harry thought about a house that was his. His parents' house. He thought about what a room that wasn't 3 feet wide felt like, and couldn't quite picture it yet, and decided that was all right because he would know it when he was in it. Can we go today? He asked. Sirius looked at him. Then at Marchbanks. The welfare review technically requires, Marchbanks began. The welfare review is a procedural formality that will take 2 weeks, Ogilvy said from behind his own stack of papers. In the interim, there is no legal instrument preventing Mr. Black from escorting his provisionally designated ward to a family property. He looked at Marchbanks. Is there? Marchbanks considered this. No, she said. Then we go today, Sirius said, and the certainty in his voice was the certainty of someone who had decided not to wait for anything anymore and meant it. They left the ministry at noon. Harry walked out through the visitor's entrance into the ordinary London street with Sirius Black beside him, blinking in the daylight with the expression of someone who found sunlight newly remarkable. Marchbanks had accompanied them to the exit and was heading back in to file the remaining paperwork. Ogilvy had gone ahead to contact the manor's caretaking protocols through Gringotts. Sirius stood on the pavement and tipped his head back and looked at the sky. Harry stood beside him and waited. 6 years, Sirius said, not to anything in particular. The sky looked the same last time. Does that help? Harry asked. Yeah, Sirius said. It does. He looked down at Harry, and the complicated warm unsettled look was still there but it had settled somewhat, taken on more definition. You did this. We did this, Harry said. Ragnarok. Marchbanks. Ogilvy. Bones. You wrote the letters. You confirmed the Fidelius. You started it, Sirius said. Harry thought about the notification letter. The torchlight. The train. The brick wall that had folded open when he'd pushed. The long hours in Ragnarok's office on a chair his feet didn't reach. For £37 and the specific kind of fury that came from understanding exactly what had been taken from you. Somebody had to, he said. Sirius looked at him for a long moment. Then he did something that was a very Sirius Black thing to do, according to everything Harry would later learn about him. He laughed, sudden and real, the full laugh of someone who had found something genuinely funny in the middle of something enormous, and the sound of it in the London street was so alive and so present that it was its own kind of answer. Come on then, he said, and reached down and took Harry's hand in the uncomplicated way of someone who had made a decision about a relationship and was done waiting to act on it. Let's go see what's ours. They walked down the street together, the tall man who had just gotten 5 years of his life back and the small boy who had given them to him, and London went about its enormous ordinary business all around them, entirely indifferent to the fact that something that had been broken for 6 years had just come back together in a ministry corridor with the sound of chains falling open. The sky was very blue. Chapter 7, House Potter, Unbroken Potter Manor was in Wiltshire. Harry hadn't known that until Sirius said it in the ministry corridor while Ogilvy was sorting out the portkey authorization, and the word Wiltshire had sat in his chest with the particular weight of a specific real thing replacing a vague imagined one. He'd pictured the manor in his mind over the weeks since Ragnar first mentioned it, sometimes large, sometimes moderate, never quite concrete, and the concreteness of Wiltshire made his heart do something he decided not to examine too closely in a ministry corridor. The portkey was a ministry-issued transport token, a small bronze disc that Sirius held with the casual familiarity of someone who had used them before, though his hands when he held it were slightly unsteady in a way Harry noticed and didn't mention. Side-along portkey travel required physical contact. Sirius held the disc and Harry held Sirius's arm and Ogilvy gave them the activation word and then the world inverted. Harry had never traveled by portkey. The sensation was like being grabbed by the middle and flung, the ministry corridor becoming a smear of color and then gone, and then solid ground arriving with a jolt under his feet that he managed by bending his knees, because he was practically minded enough to have asked Marchbanks what portkey arrival felt like before he'd been through one. He straightened up and looked. The grounds came first. They were wide, genuinely, comprehensively wide in a way that the word grounds didn't quite cover. Green and overgrown in the specific way of land that had been properly tended for centuries and then left for 6 years, not ruined but gone beyond the cultivated edge into something wilder, the hedges thicker than intended, the grass long, a stone path that led from where they were standing toward the house half covered by the patient encroachment of the things growing on either side of it. Old trees on the periphery, their canopies enormous, the light falling through them in long late afternoon shafts that turned the overgrown garden into something that was accidentally beautiful. And the house. It was not enormous. Harry had half expected enormous, some part of him projecting the word manor into the territory of ancestral piles and sweeping staircases. It was substantial, 3 stories, stone, built in the way old things were built when built meant permanent rather than impressive, with tall narrow windows that caught the afternoon light and ivy covering the left-hand third of the facade that had been allowed to run further than anyone had managed in 6 years. The front door was oak, dark with age, with a crest inlaid in bronze that Harry could see even from this distance. He stood still and looked at it. Sirius was standing beside him, also looking, and was quiet in a way that was different from his earlier quiet. This was the quiet of someone encountering something they'd known about but not been ready for, the way you knew a person was dead and still weren't ready for the first time you passed the place they used to be. "I came here twice," Sirius said. "When James and Lily first moved in. Before everything got serious with the war. We had dinner here." He paused. James made an absolutely terrible roast. Lily was not allowed to let him forget it. Harry looked at the house. Then at the ivy. Then at the path. "Let's go in," he said. The wards recognized him at the gate, a soft pulse of warmth as they passed through, not aggressive, not interrogating, just the particular recognition of something that had been waiting. Ragnar had explained this would happen, the estate's magical framework was tied to Potter bloodline, and Harry's blood had confirmed itself comprehensively enough on a Gringotts verification stone that no ward built by a Potter was going to keep him out. The path crunched slightly under their feet, gravel underneath the encroaching moss. The birds in the old trees were making the sounds of late afternoon, the particular going-to-rest sounds that Harry associated with the best part of the day, the part just before the light went gold. His feet were still in Dudley's 2 large shoes and he thought, with a clarity that was almost funny, that the next thing he was going to do after they'd been inside was find a shop that sold shoes that fit. He could do that now. He had a vault. The bronze crest on the front door resolved as they approached, a stag, antlers up, looking outward, with the Latin words beneath it that Harry sounded out carefully, Vertice Veritas. Courage and truth. He put his hand on the door. It opened. Not with a key, not with a spell, just with his hand on it and the wards doing their work, and the door swung inward on hinges that moved more smoothly than 6 years' disuse had any right to produce, and the house breathed out at him, cool, slightly still, the smell of old wood and something that was somewhere between dust and the suggestion of things that had been there before the dust, fires and cooking and the ordinary accumulated smell of a place where people had lived. He stepped inside. The entrance hall was high-ceilinged and square, with flagstone floors and a staircase at the far end that curved left on its way up. There were portraits on the walls. Harry stopped and looked at them, because they looked back, and what he hadn't quite prepared for was how attentive they were. Not uniformly so. Some of them observed with the mild interest of people watching something from a comfortable distance. But two of them, near the stairs, were watching him with the specific focused attention of portraits that had been waiting for this and had opinions about it. The one on the left was a witch in robes from several generations back, white-haired and sharp-featured with the same direct quality of gaze that Harry was beginning to think was a Potter characteristic. She looked at him for a long moment. "You're James's boy," she said. "Yes," Harry said. "You look like him." A pause. "And like her." "The eyes are hers." She settled slightly in her frame. "We've been waiting. The house has been waiting." She looked at the entrance hall with a proprietorial satisfaction that had something of relief in it. "Good." The portrait on the right was a man who might have been 40 or 60, dressed more practically than the witch, with an expression of careful assessment that reminded Harry of Ragnarok. He looked at Harry for a long moment without speaking. "You've been busy," he said finally. "Yes," Harry said. "Good," the man said, with the crisp finality of someone who didn't distribute approval widely but meant it absolutely when they did. Sirius was behind Harry, taking in the entrance hall with the expression of someone integrating memory and present experience in real time. He looked at the portraits with something complicated on his face. "Euphemia," he said, to the white-haired witch. She looked at him. "Sirius Black." Her voice was measured. "I've heard what happened. From the other portraits." She paused. "Welcome back." Sirius absorbed this. "Thank you." Harry moved deeper into the house. It took 2 hours to move through the ground floor, not because it was enormous but because Harry moved carefully, opening doors and looking into rooms with the methodical attention of someone who understood they were encountering something important and didn't want to rush it. Sirius followed, sometimes ahead, sometimes stopping in doorways with his hands in his pockets and the expression of someone sorting through layers. The kitchen was at the back of the house, large, stone-floored, with a fireplace that was big enough to stand in and copper pots still hanging on their hooks above a central table that was solid and old and clearly built to be used hard. The pots had tarnished. The fireplace was cold. The table needed a cloth. But the room had the bones of a place where things had been cooked and eaten and argued over and laughed at for a very long time, and the bones were good. Harry looked at the copper pots and thought, those just need polishing. The sitting room had bookshelves on 2 walls, most of the books still in place, slightly dusty but present. A sofa and 2 armchairs arranged around a cold hearth, a writing desk by the window, a low table with a chess set that still had pieces on it from a game that had been left mid-play 6 years ago and never resumed. Harry looked at the chess set. He thought about who had been playing. 2 people, a game interrupted by everything that had happened after. He didn't touch it. He stood and looked at it and let that be what it was. Sirius's hand came to his shoulder briefly, just a moment, and moved away. There was a study at the end of the ground floor corridor that was clearly his father's. There were Quidditch photographs on the walls, moving photographs where people in red and gold robes flew patterns across frames, and a desk that had papers still spread across it, and a small framed photograph on the corner of the desk that Harry picked up and looked at. It was his parents. Not a formal photograph, not a posed one, it looked like someone had caught them in the kitchen, his mother laughing at something off-frame, his father in the process of turning toward her with an expression that was completely unguarded, completely present. They were young, early 20s at most, and they were completely alive in the moment the photograph had captured and kept. The photograph moved. His mother's laugh continued, his father kept turning, a loop of a few seconds that repeated without getting tired of itself. Harry stood with it in his hands for a long time. He didn't cry. It wasn't that kind of moment, or it was, but it was also something else, something that didn't have a name yet but that felt like the closing of a distance he hadn't known was open. He had seen pictures of his parents before, the photographs people sometimes had of famous people, but those had always been famous people photographs, images of the boy who lived's parents rather than images of James and Lily Potter in their kitchen being themselves. This was different. He set the photograph down carefully, face up so the loop could keep running, and went back out into the corridor. They found the kitchen table again at dusk. Sirius had located a tea caddy in the back of a cupboard that still had tea in it, and a kettle, and had been making tea with the focused concentration of someone for whom the mechanical task of making something was currently very helpful. Harry sat at the kitchen table and watched the copper pots catching the last light and thought about what came next. Sirius put a mug in front of him. Harry wrapped both hands around it. Dumbledore will still be at Hogwarts, Sirius said. He sat down across the table. He'll still be, what he is. Important. Powerful. Full of plans he thinks are for the best. Yes, Harry said. What do you want to do about that? Harry thought about it. The restitution proceedings will take months. Marchbank said the Wizengamot will drag it out. But the audit finding is registered, the freeze is in place, the evidence is all there. He can't make it go away. That's not quite what I meant, Sirius said. He looked at Harry across the table with the directness that Harry was coming to recognize as his natural mode, the directness of someone who had been many things but had never been comfortable being indirect. I meant, do you want to fight him? Fully. The Wizengamot seat, the censure motion, all of it. Or do you want to, I don't know. Get on with things. Harry looked at the mug. Thought about it properly, the way he thought about important things. Both, he said. They're not separate. Getting on with things and making sure what he did has consequences, that's the same thing, not two different choices. He looked up. If he doesn't face consequences, someone else does the same thing to someone else. Maybe someone without a Gringotts letter and £4.37. Sirius was quiet for a moment. Your mum used to say something like that, he said. That justice wasn't personal. It was structural. It wasn't about the person you were angry at, it was about what happened to the next person if you didn't fix the thing. Harry felt something warm in his chest that was not entirely about the tea. The censure motion, he said. Marchbanks has been building it. It cites the unauthorized vault access, the failure to ensure a guardian review, the suppression of the will. The serious situation is part of that too, the argument being that he was in a position to question the arrest and didn't. She thinks it'll pass if the restitution findings go in first and the Wizengamot has already established that unauthorized access occurred. Will it pass? Depends on the panel. Not the same 7 from today, this would be the full Wizengamot, 50 members. Harry thought about it. Umbridge will vote against. Some of the Ministry loyalists will follow her. But the audit evidence is public record now, and Harriet Bloom's article is being read everywhere, and people don't generally enjoy learning that someone was stealing from an orphaned baby and using the money for private projects. Sirius made a sound that was not quite a laugh. No, he said. They don't. It'll pass, Harry said. It wasn't arrogance, it was the quiet confidence of someone who had checked the evidence and done the arithmetic. It won't destroy him. He'll keep his Hogwarts position, the board controls that, not the Wizengamot, and the board won't act unless they have to. But he'll lose the chief warlock position. He'll lose political capital. And the Phoenix Fund investigation will keep going. He'll still think he was right, Sirius said. Probably, Harry said. For a long time. Maybe always. He looked at the copper pots on their hooks. That's not something I can fix. I can make sure what he did is on record and has a cost. I can't make him understand why it was wrong. Sirius looked at him across the table. You're 6. People keep saying that, Harry said. It keeps being worth saying. Sirius wrapped his hands around his own mug. He looked older in the kitchen light and younger too, the same paradox Harry had seen in the courtroom, the Azkaban years on the surface and the person underneath them increasingly present. Harry. I need to ask you something and I need you to give me an honest answer. All right. Are you okay? Harry looked at him. Not, strategically. Not this is manageable okay. I mean, Sirius seemed to be looking for words with the slight difficulty of someone whose emotional vocabulary had been somewhat out of use. I mean the cupboard. And the shoes. And 6 years of people treating you like you were a problem they were containing. Are you? He stopped. Tried again. You're very good at moving forward. I want to know that you're not moving forward instead of what? Harry asked. Instead of letting it be bad, Sirius said. The things that were bad. They were bad. And you're 6 and you've handled all of this with more composure than most adults I've known, and it's extraordinary, it genuinely is. But it's also okay for the cupboard to have been terrible and for that too. He stopped again. I'm doing this badly. No, Harry said. You're not. He sat with the question. He was honest with himself about it, the way he was honest with himself about everything, because honesty was the only thing that was consistently useful. I'm mostly okay, he said. The cupboard was bad. The shoes and the food and being ignored and being blamed for things, that was all bad. And I knew it was bad while it was happening, I wasn't confused about it. But I was also, he stopped, finding the right words, I was also managing. I think I spent so long managing that the feelings about it got folded away somewhere. I didn't have space for them. And now? Sirius asked. Now I have space, Harry said. I think it'll come. The feelings. He looked at Sirius. It came a little, in the courtroom. When the chains opened. Sirius looked at him. I cried a little bit, Harry said, with the matter-of-fact honesty of someone reporting a thing that happened. Not a lot. But some. Yeah, Sirius said quietly. Me too. They sat with that for a moment in the kitchen that smelled of old wood and cool stone and a house that had been waiting. I'm going to be all right, Harry said. It wasn't a performance. It was just the truth of where he was, not healed, not finished, not solved, but pointed in the right direction with enough forward momentum to trust the direction. I think we both will. Sirius looked at him for a long time. Then he reached across the table and put his fist down on it gently, the way you might put down a handshake between people who weren't quite at the hug stage yet but were getting there, and Harry put his own small fist next to it, and they stayed there for a moment like two people ratifying something. Right, Sirius said. We should figure out the sleeping situation. And probably actual food. He looked around the kitchen with the expression of someone taking on a project. The manor hasn't been properly opened up in 6 years. I'm going to need to contact the magical maintenance people. And there's probably a Gringotts estate management meeting we need to, Ragnarok already scheduled it, Harry said. Next Thursday. Sirius stared at him. I asked him to, Harry said. When I wrote last week. You scheduled the estate management meeting before we'd had the hearing. I scheduled it when the hearing date was confirmed, Harry said. Seemed reasonable to be prepared. Sirius pressed his lips together in the way that was clearly containing a laugh. He looked at the ceiling, looked back at Harry, made the decision not to say whatever he was thinking. Next Thursday, he said. Yes. And in the meantime? In the meantime, Harry said, there are copper pots that need polishing. And I need shoes that fit. And the chess game in the sitting room, I'd like to finish it, if you think it would be all right. Something moved across Sirius's face, something old and careful. He thought about it. I think James would have liked that, he said. Yeah, Harry said. I thought so too. The censure motion reached the full Wizarding 6 weeks later, after the formal audit judgment had been entered into the registry and the restitution order had been issued, 1.1 million galleons, to be repaid to Vault 687 from Dumbledore's personal accounts and from the assets of the Phoenix Fund, over a structured schedule determined by the Wizarding Financial Committee. The schedule was the compromise. The debt itself was not. Harry attended the censure hearing with Marchbanks. Sirius stayed home by choice, he had said, straightforwardly, that he could not be in that room and look at certain people without making the proceedings substantially more complicated, and that Harry had it handled, and both of these things were true. The hearing was different from the black exoneration. More crowded, more political, more noise in the room from the moment the session opened. 50 Wisengamot members in their plum robes, the gallery full, 3 press outlets with passes. Augusta Longbottom chairing in Dumbledore's absence, because this was the first session following his recusal from matters related to Harry Potter, and that recusal had been extended by motion to cover any matter arising from the audit. Dumbledore was not in the gallery this time. He was not in the building. He had written, through the official channels, a single formal statement acknowledging the restitution order and making no contest to the censure motion, which Marchbanks had read aloud to Harry over breakfast and which Harry had sat with for a long time. The statement said, "I do not contest the motion. The actions that produced it were mine. The consequences are appropriate." Short. No justification. No context. No suggestion of greater purposes. Harry had put the paper down and thought, he's learning. Slowly, expensively, in the way that people learn things when the alternative was no longer tenable. But learning. The censure passed 41-9. Dolores Umbridge voted against. 8 others followed her, and the fact that only 8 did, in the current political climate, told Harry something about how the evidence had landed. Dumbledore lost the chief warlock position by a separate motion immediately after. He remained headmaster of Hogwarts. He remained, in the estimation of most people who'd held that estimation before, the greatest wizard alive. Some things moved slowly even when evidence was conclusive, and the assessment of a person who had been building a particular reputation for 80 years was not dismantled in a morning. But it had costs now. Real ones. Official ones. Ones that were on record. Harry sat at the petitioner's table through all of it and felt the satisfying, moderate weight of something that had been pursued the right way reaching the right conclusion. Not triumphant, triumph was too hot for this, too much like the thing would end here when it wasn't going to end here, it was going to continue and be managed and kept accountable for a long time. But right. The specific, clean rightness of a thing that was true being treated as true. Marchbanks leaned toward him during the brief recess between the censure vote and the chief warlock motion. "How are you feeling?" "Good," Harry said. "Just good?" He thought about it. "Properly good," he said. "Not relief exactly. More like, he found the edge of it. Like the room is the right size." Marchbanks looked at him. "Yes," she said. "I know what you mean." Sirius had been to Diagon Alley twice by the time the censure hearing happened, both times with Harry and both times with the slightly overwhelmed quality of someone reacquainting themselves with the texture of ordinary life. The first time he'd stopped in the middle of the alley and just stood there for a moment, head up, taking in the noise and the people and the shops, and Harry had stood beside him and waited without comment until Sirius was ready to move again. The second time was better. They'd gone to Flourish and Blots, which Harry wanted on principle because he was reading through the law guide and needed the next volume, and Sirius had found the Quidditch section and had the particular bright-eyed energy of someone rediscovering something they'd loved before the interruption of their life. He'd bought 2 books, a broomstick magazine, and a second magazine that he'd bought with the furtive energy of someone buying something slightly ridiculous and knew it. "It's about Muggle motor bikes," he said, when Harry looked at it. "I know what it is," Harry said. "I had a bike," Sirius said. "Before. It's probably still, actually, it might be at Hagrid's. I lent it to Hagrid." "Who's Hagrid?" "Keeper of keys at Hogwarts. Enormous man. Huge heart. I gave him the bike to get you to your aunt's house because Dumbledore had organized everything and I was," he stopped. His face did something complicated. "I was going to go after Peter. Instead of making sure you were settled. I chose the wrong thing in the wrong order." Harry looked at him. "You were 21, he said. And your best friends had just been killed." "Yes," Sirius said. You made a 21-year-old decision when you were 21 and in the worst situation of your life, Harry said. That's different from making a deliberate choice to ignore what was right. Sirius looked at him for a moment. You're very good at that. At what? Distinguishing between the kind of wrong that is someone's fault and the kind that's just, what happened. He paused. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to do that as cleanly. You will, Harry said. It'll take a while. They'd gone back to the manor with the books and the magazines and stopped for fish and chips from a muggle shop near the Portkey Point, eating them on the front step of the manor in the late afternoon sun. Sirius had eaten 2 pieces of fish and 3 portions of chips with the focused appreciation of someone who had not had proper food in a long time and intended to remedy this as comprehensively as possible. The manor was opening up around them, slowly, room by room, as Harry and Sirius worked through it with the methodical care of people moving back into something that had been waiting. The magical maintenance team had been through the week before, clearing the most urgent things, damp, pest deterrence, the structural magic that kept the wards functioning. The aesthetic state of the house was their project, ongoing. Harry had taken the master bedroom as his project. Not to sleep in, he'd chosen a room on the second floor that had a window facing the old trees and which felt proportionate, not too large, which he needed right now even though he was aware this was a preference he'd eventually grow out of, but as a project of restoration, because it was his parents' room and it had been left the way it was on the last day they'd been in it, and he thought it deserved better than to stay in mid-October 1981 indefinitely. He'd asked Sirius to help him with it, because it was too much for one person and because Sirius needed things to do, and they'd spent 3 evenings in there together, sorting through what was there, what was personal and should be kept carefully, what was furniture and household and could be arranged properly. They'd talked through those evenings, not always about James and Lily, sometimes about completely different things, what Sirius was planning to do about the Black family properties, whether Harry had thoughts about Hogwarts, what they should do about the fact that the garden needed significant work. But sometimes about James and Lily, and those conversations Harry listened to with the complete focused attention of someone receiving something irreplaceable, filing the details, the stories, the specific memories, the flavor of what his parents had been like as real people, with the same careful methodology he applied to everything, because he understood these were the things you couldn't get from documents and needed a person for. He was building something. Not a mythology, he was too honest for mythology, but a real picture, assembled from real pieces, of 2 people he'd lost before he could know them. It was incomplete and it would always be incomplete and he'd made peace with that, mostly. Incomplete was better than nothing. Incomplete was something to work with. A letter arrived from Dumbledore in October. It was addressed to Harry at Potter Manor, which meant he'd accepted the change of address, which itself was a kind of acknowledgement. Harry took it to the garden, to the bench they'd set up under the old tree that had become his reading spot, and opened it in the autumn afternoon light. It was not a long letter. Not like the ones from the summer, dense with managed warmth and strategic content. It was 2 paragraphs, each one carefully written in a way that felt different from the earlier letters, less polished, somehow. More like someone writing a thing they needed to write rather than a thing they needed to achieve. Harry, I have been thinking a great deal about what you said in August, about meaning something and understanding it fully being different things. I have been thinking about it the way you think about something you know is right but haven't wanted to examine closely. The specific thing I have not wanted to examine closely is this: I was afraid that if you knew who you were and what you had, you would not become what I believed you needed to become. I believed that required a particular kind of formation, humility, unknowingness, the willingness to step into a role rather than to choose it. I was wrong. Not about the need for humility, I still believe that matters. I was wrong about who had the right to produce it, and how. A person's character is not something another person builds. I understand that now in a way I did not when I made the choices I made. I don't expect this to change anything between us quickly. I offer it because it is true and because you were right to ask me to use the time well. Albus Dumbledore. Harry read it twice. Sat with it for a while, the October garden quiet around him, the old tree losing its leaves in the specific unhurried way of something that had done this many times before. He thought about the man who had written it. The complicated, brilliant, genuinely caring man who had been wrong in a way that had cost a great deal and who was, slowly, at cost to himself, trying to understand how. He wrote back that evening, at the desk in his father's study with the photograph of his parents still running its looping moment in the corner. Professor Dumbledore, thank you. I believe you. I'd like to meet properly at some point, not with lawyers, not about legal matters. Just because I'm going to be at Hogwarts in 5 years and knowing you before then seems better than not. On my terms and Sirius's. When we're ready. Not yet. But at some point. Harry, he sealed it and sent it. Leaned back in the chair and looked at the photograph, his mother laughing, his father turning, the loop of it patient and unending. He had a house. He had a vault with his family's money being returned to it in scheduled installments. He had a Wisengamot seat with Gringotts managing it until he was old enough to sit it himself. He had Marchbanks and Ogilvy and Ragnock and Amelia Bones, people who had come into this at different angles and for different reasons and who had all decided that what he was doing was worth helping. He had a father's study with a photograph on the desk and a chess game in the sitting room that he and Sirius had started finishing, one careful move at a time. He had Sirius, down the hall, probably reading the motorbike magazine and pretending he wasn't, having nightmares less frequently than he had in September, eating better, laughing more, the Azkaban surface slowly becoming less defining and the person underneath it more so. He was 6 years old. He had a very long way to go and a great many things ahead of him that he couldn't fully anticipate. The wizarding world was complicated and his place in it was going to stay complicated, and Voldemort was out there somewhere in whatever form he'd survived in, and the restitution proceeding still had months to run, and Pettigrew was still missing and being actively searched for by Amelia Bones through channels that were careful and ongoing. There was a great deal of work still ahead. Harry looked at the photograph of his parents. At the caught moment of his mother's laugh, his father's turning face, the two people who had chosen to call him their own before he could choose anything back. He thought about what Sirius had said, they were everything I had that was real. He thought about what his mother had written in the margin of her will, in ink that had been waiting 6 years for him to read it. He thought about the brick wall in the leaky cauldron courtyard and the way it had folded open when he'd pushed, and how the pushing hadn't required a wand or training or anyone's permission, just the magic that was in him, that had always been in him, that no cupboard or absence or misdirection had been able to take out. He was Harry James Potter. Lord of an ancient house, by blood and by law and by the particular force of will that turned out to be the most effective kind of inheritance. He was 6 years old and he was exactly himself, and no one had managed to make him anything else. Outside, the old trees were doing what old trees did in October, releasing what they didn't need, standing steady in what remained, patient with the process because they'd been through it before and knew what came after. Spring came after. Harry closed the study door behind him and went to find Sirius for dinner.